We are waiting like 2 minutes for 8 people to get in. 5 people, perfect timing. B for the third of our organizers. So I'm Marco. Nice to meet you.
Letizia.
So, and also Anna from remote. But they're busy parenting right now. No, babies tend to claim your attention when you least expect them to. So they will be here shortly in like 2 minutes, worst case. Otherwise, we can start without them and we'll join us later. All right. So here, what you can see here is our website, at least one of the pages of the website, with the very simple protocol today. So we'll have 2 speakers. The first by Professor Yukie Nagai, Tokyo University, then from Professor Jochen Triesch. And then we have a contribution from remote of the paper we presented today. If you didn't know, well, if this is the first time you've seen the web page, A, how did you get here? Yes. Good on you for finding us. B, this is where you can talk, probably will see, but right now it's a bit updated, but we have a bit of the bio of speakers, probably we'll share also the contribution of the remote attendance over here. So a bit about us, by the way, I am a student, PhD student, my second year, usually. I'm working with the Italian Institute of Technology and University of Genova. I'm interested in developmental robotics, as you might guess, and robotics. In a broad sense, as it was not my background, I'm a computer engineer, so I did not know a lot about babies before a few months ago. I mean, I know they exist and what they do generally, screaming stuff. But I learned only recently that they are amazing machines that can teach us a lot about how we think and operate in everyday life. So it's quite interesting research subject. And then we have a teacher.
Yeah. I'm Letizia. I'm in my last year of PhD. I studied in the State University of Campinas in Brazil. Also, I'm affiliated with the Italian Institute of Technology. I work with dev and cognitive robotics, focused in cognitive architectures and motivational frameworks, mainly intrinsic motivation. And I think this, yeah.
Yeah.
Anna, are you here?
Check if they said something from remote. Yeah, we're coordinating with, again, our third organizer, Anna, is now in Sweden, so we have to manage parenting and then time zones and stuff. So please forgive us if the beginning is a bit rough, but I think we can start and then do some later. Oh, sure.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So since parenting is taking a bit longer, I'd say we can start with the first invited speaker of today. So Professor Nagai, if you'd like to join us here. We have Professor Nagai, which is, I will show the magic technology here. This point. Sorry. Oh yeah, Wi-Fi is sort of working. Page. Let us. That was this. Okay. Oh, that's magic. Wait. So let me stop the sharing because so we can see your contribution there. Well, yes. So Professor Nagai, which is getting ready with technology here. It's a project professor at the International Research Center for Neurointelligence at the University of Tokyo, and the IRCN. She got her PhD in engineering in Osaka University in 2004, and then has worked with the National Institute of Information and Communication Technology, Bielefeld University, Osaka University, lots of stuff. She's been around for quite a bit, as in time, but also contribution to the community, I would say. So thank you for that. And since 2019, she's leading the Cognitive Developmental Robotics Lab at the University of Tokyo, which I had the pleasure to take part in for a couple of months. And so you will see what her research is about in a few minutes, but generally is about, cognitive robotics, developmental robotics, as the name of the lab would imply, and the neural mechanisms that are underneath many of the things we can do, actually, also with an interest in autism spectrum disorder and how that correlates with everything else. She received the world's 50 most renewed women in robotics in 2020 and 35. She was in the 35 women in robotics, engineering, and science in 2022. So it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. So thank you for your time, and I'll ask you a small round of applause for starting. So thank you, and I'll give it to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marco, for kind introduction. And again, my name is Yukie Nagai, working at the University of Tokyo. And it's my great pleasure to give the presentation here. But actually, I will also give the talk tomorrow in the main conference. So I try to divide the topic into two parts. And today I'm going to talk about the interplay between the learning and scaffolding. Because usually I often give a talk about the predictive coding mechanism for robot learning. But I would like to talk this topic tomorrow in the organization day and organizing. So today I'd like to focus more on how the scaffolding behaviors of the caregivers would also facilitate and play an important role in the learning mechanism. To start with, I'd like to give you some video clips that are showing our research activities. These are the series of our research activities, and they're showing that how the robots can learn some of the social cognitive functions through the interaction with the human caregivers. For example, the top left showing the very original study of my PhD and also the postdoc period, showing that the robot can learn to follow their human gaze, which is a joint attention ability, which becomes one of the very hot topics in the ICDL communities. And then my research group has been also developing the learning mechanism for their helping behaviors, algorithmic behaviors, for emotion estimation, and also the drawing activities. So as you can see in these slides, and also if you're familiar with the ICDL community, you know that there are many researchers working on the learning mechanism of inference or robots. But I'd like to emphasize that there is still a big gap between their infant learning and the robot learning. For example, in case of the robot learning, from machine learning, we often do the batch learning. We first collect the learning data and then just let a robot work with the program to learn the statistics behind their data. But of course, the babies or the infants learn in the online manner, which means that the infants act on the environment and then in real time they receive the feedback from the environment and also the social factors. And because of these differences, you can also see the direction of their learning rate or the development changes. In case of robot learning, it's kind of unidirectional, the interaction. There is no like a real-time interaction with the human caregiver, but rather the robot just learn and then output the learning performances. And among these, there are many gaps between the infant learning and robot learning. I'd like to emphasize the importance of the caregivers. Actually, most of the differences between the infant and the robot learning were also caused by the difference in the existence of the caregivers. As you know that the caregivers play a very important role in the infant development. Caregivers provide the scaffolding for the baby's learning, and also the baby's learning facilitates the scaffolding behaviors of caregivers. Here, the question is when and how the infant behaviors and the caregiver's behavior gradually changes through the development. Once the infant acquire their cognitive abilities, the scaffolding behavior of the caregiver also gradually change. And then there is a strong interplay between the caregiver's scaffolding and the infant learning plays an important role in achieving the success of cognitive development. And another research question is, what social signals or their sensory-motor signals they will utilize to change their behaviors? Not only their, for example, in case of their motor development, they utilize not only the sensory motor signals, but also the social signals. Question is, how certain social signals also are utilized in the learning of this? So I would like to show you some series of studies that have been addressing these two research issues. I will give you mainly the three first. One focusing on their action learning, their object manipulation learning. The second one is the drawing behaviors. And the third one is focusing on their autonomic nervous system regulations. So the first part is about the object manipulation learning. This is a very, I could say, the starting point for myself to start looking at the caregivers scaffolding behavior. Now you can see two video clips. The same person is demonstrating the same stuff, but you can see the big differences in his behavior. On the left side, you can see that he is very enthusiastic and he's very carefully moving the cups. In contrast, on the right side, the same persons showing the task, but very quickly, very efficient. What causes the differences in this behavior? The instruction was the same. Only the difference is the interaction partner. On the left side, he was showing the task to his child. On the right side, that he was showing the same task to his wife. This may be why he was not so enthusiastic in the right side conditions. And the researchers that in development psychology made this difference in the action demonstration motions. You may have heard about the mother race. Mother race is the modification in the speech toward their babies. When their caregivers talk to the babies, they exaggerate their speech, changing the pitch largely or also slowly. The similar phenomenon have been also observed in the action demonstrations. They move slower and also exaggerate their trajectories. And then we started asking the questions, how these differences would also facilitate the infant action learning, and what kind of differences we can really see between the infant-directed actions and the adult-directed action. So as a computer scientist, we do not look only at the infant reactions, but we are very much interested in how the computational techniques can be utilized for analyzing this kind of their behaviors. And then I developed the saliency model inspired by the Indian COP model, integrating not only the sub features, but also the non. The saliency model, as you can see here, it nicely demonstrates their humorous bottom-up attention. When we don't have any of the top-down as goal work and goal observing their images, we just look at their something bottom-up salient locations. And this saliency model can do the very similar things just by calculating the differences in the certain image region with the surroundings. For example, that in case of a color channel, you can see that their face regions and also the cups are higher. In contrast, in the orientation channel, the edge features objects are higher. And then in the motion channel, of course, you can see the motion region. Please note that this model does not utilize any clear knowledge about the environment or task. So for example, if you carefully look at their blue cup is not so salient because of the blue background. So you can see that this is really the bottom of the salient calculations. But nevertheless, that this model has shown that it can nicely simulate the very young infant, the visual attention, who also do not have so much knowledge about work. So by using this model, we have analyzed what informations were highlighted in the infant-directed actions compared to the adult-directed actions. We found two important findings. The first one is about the highlight of the goal state. You can see that this red marker showing the most salient location in the scene, detected by the saliency model. not by the infant location, but there are salient locations detected by settings. You can see that there before starting demonstrating task, and also after finishing the task, this mother completely suppressed the body movement. And then at that moment, the touch state were highlighted and attract the attention like this. By suppressing the body motions, the mother will successfully highlight the color information at the top. For example, if she just continue moving, maybe the motions would attract attention, so the top would not be highlighted. But by suppressing their body movement, the mothers often highlight the goal state or the initial state of the task. Of course, their mothers do not know how their video will be analyzed. But then, in order to highlight and also attract the baby's attention to the state, she just naturally suppressed her body movement. And we also found that the mothers often talk to the babies. This is why the mothers can next attract the baby's attention by the cellular attentions to the face features. So this is the one typical example showing that this mother often get closer to their babies, and then the face regions of the mother becomes more salient. And then as a result, you can see that there are more stronger attention to the face regions. So in this way, we could observe that even if the model does not utilize any clear knowledge about the task or environment, the series model, of course, does not know how face look like. But then just by detecting their outstanding location in the scene, the series model could successfully detect the hierarchy information in the motions. And by further expanding the series model, we could also show that the action primitives were easily extracted from the motion, the action demonstrations. We started with the saliency map, and then we extended the salient regions by calculating the continuity, the spatial and temporal continuity in the attended information. The attended vocation has the information about the color, motion, age feature, and so on. And then by examining the continuity of these features, we could extract the action primitive like this. You can see kind of triangle patterns in this image, which nicely corresponds to the 3 action primitives here. Picking up the cut, moving the cut, and then going to the next step. Again, this model does not know anything about the task. Of course, it does not know what the action primitive is, but just by examining the continuity in the attended locations, the model could extract these 3 primitives from the motions, the action demonstrations. And the next question is how this kind of action modification would also influence the infant behaviors. In the previous study, we did not look at the infant reaction. We applied a saliency model to simulate the infant attention. But now we can also analyze the infant reactions when they're interacting with their caregivers who are again demonstrating the same task to the babies. Here we utilize their Kinect sensors to detect the 3D body postures, and then by applying the transfer entropy analysis to measure the information transfer between the 2 modality signals, we can examine which social or sensory motor cues would influence each other. So first we look at the influence between the caregiver and the infants. So what kind of signals from the mother side would impact on the infant reactions, and also what kind of infant reaction would again impact the caregiver's demonstrations. We compared this information transfer between the younger age group and the older age group. The lighter color corresponds to the younger age group, and the darker color corresponds to the older age group. And first, the overall information transfer was compared between these 2 groups. And we found that the older age group had a stronger information transfer between the infant and child in both sides. Which, of course, we can imagine that as the babies develop and acquire the social reactive behaviors, and then the infant behaviors become more responsible to the caregivers' demonstration. This is why the increase of the information transfer was observed between these two. The interesting point is the next more detailed analysis. Which signal, what cues really impact on the infant and the caregiver's behavior? We looked at all possible combinations between their caregiver side and infant side. We looked at their gaze, hand movement, and also their torso movement. And the most interesting finding first here, we found that there are significant increase in the information transfer between the gaze signal between the infant and the caregiver. So the capital gaze corresponds to the mother's gaze, and then there with small letters there you can see the infant gaze. So their influence from their mother's gaze to the infant's gaze is strongly improved with the two age groups. In the previous slide, I showed that there one example of the local learning, which is the joint attention. You can see that there are joint attention ability or the gaze following behaviors gradually develop in the first few years of life. So I think that this finding nicely corresponds to the development of the joint attention ability in infants. By reading the gaze direction of the mothers, infant can properly attend their objectifications. And another interesting finding was observed from their bottom graph. This showing that their influence of their babies, their body movement to their mother's right hand movement. In this task, most of the mother were right hand, so which means that the demonstration of the mother's task was significantly influenced by the babies, the reactions, reactive behaviors. And especially in their older age group, we could find a stronger information transfer from the babies to the mothers, which nicely showing that their motions, their action modification in the mothers were induced by the reactions of their infant. And then we can analyze not only the information transfer between the caregiver and infant, but also within infant and caregivers. For example, how the babies can nicely coordinate their two-hand movement, or also the eye-hand coordinations. And first, we looked at the overall change in the information transfer. And again, we could find that there are developmental improvement in the information transfer within the infant and also within the caregivers. And then by closely looking at the result, we could find that the significant improvement was observed from their baby's left hand to the right hand movement, left hand to right hand movement, and vice versa. Again, the babies, they're at their 6 to 8 months old, they are still young to manipulate the object. So in that case, you cannot observe the proper coordination between the two tasks. But the older age group, the babies will acquire the bimanual coordination. This is why we could observe the strong improvement in their transfer entropy. In contrast, that in the mother side, we could not observe the significant differences. This is because, of course, the mother have their nicely coordinated their two-hand movement or also the eye-hand coordination. That might be why we did not observe the significant change in their mother sides. And then we also closely looked at what kind of their infant, their reaction or infant skills would directly increase their mother's action demonstrations. As one of their well-known characteristics of motion is the roundabout ratio of the mother's movement, how large their trajectory is. And we look at what happens if their baby has irrelevant actions, or if the baby has relevant actions. In these scenarios, that nesting the cup is the goal of the task. So we named that, for example, that if the baby is just binding or mouthing the cup, this task or these actions are called task irrelevant actions. In contrast, babies sometimes were successful in nesting the cup. In this case, that we call it task relevant actions. And then we observed how their mother's action demonstration changes after their baby showed task irrelevant or relevant actions. Here is a result. The basic findings, the most interesting finding was illustrated on the right side. After the baby showed that task irrelevant actions, we could actually observe the higher roundabout ratio in the caregivers action demonstration. Whereas after the task relevant actions, the mothers actually there maybe smaller movement in the task. We guess that we think that because of the task irrelevant actions, the mother recognized that they have to emphasize the goal of the task. And also by putting their higher variability in the action demonstrations, the babies could better extract the goal of the action. That might be why the roundabout ratio significantly increased after the task relevant action of the babies. And interestingly, the similar phenomena was also observed in the human robot interactions. Here in these scenarios, we already trained our robots to learn the action clearly. For example, picking up an object, moving an object, or putting down the object. But in the beginning of the interaction, the robot did not know how the robot can utilize such abilities to achieve the action goal. And then the human subject were instructed to give the demonstrations so that the robot can achieve the object replacement. Here you can see some repetitions of their demonstrations, and then you can see that their participants' movement becomes a little bit slower through their interactions, and also now he or she was exaggerating the movement so that the robot can more easily extract the action figures. We also did their statistical analysis here. Their trajectory of the object movement gradually changed, and then their trajectory get longer and longer after learning progresses. And also the demonstration time get longer and longer as interaction. And the second example is the representational learning. In the object manipulation, we could observe some interesting interaction between the scaffolding and learning behaviors. But in the past demonstration for past development of the skills of the object manipulations, the individual biases could not be easily observed. So in order to see how the individual differences could also changes over the development, we designed a new task, which is an representational learning. Here is a scenario. We prepare the tablet on which only the part of the figure already shown. In this case, the inner feature of the face is shown, and then the children were asked to draw whatever they want. Please note that the children were not instructed to add the missing parts, but they were encouraged to draw whatever they want. So this is why, for example, the young child often did this kind of scribbling, because he could not get the idea of the goal of the task. This is why that often the young children did this behaviors. In contrast, this boy already older. So in this case, we designed a very tricky scenario or stimuli where their face features are stronger, but still he tried to make the sense of their presented image. And even for their scrambled windows and the door scenarios, he could create their two-layered pattern. I think this is nicely showing the creative performances of the children. Here is the analysis result of their children's drawing. We collected the data over the 100 children. Each dot corresponds to the one chart. And we could roughly first categorize the child drawing into 4 patterns. The first one is scribbling, which were observed in young children, and also the coloring, tracing were observed. And finally, of course, we could observe the completion patterns. And first, we can roughly observe the developmental change in the drawing patterns. In this 2D dimensional, you can see there how the completion score and also the dissimilarity score changes. And from bottom left to top right, you can see the gradual change from scribbling to the completion patterns, which nicely corresponds to the development of the infant age. And interestingly, we also observe the individual differences. For example, this example showing that this subject or the child often just trace the existing line. He did not really try to add the missing part, but rather just trace the existing lines. In contrast, this chart often drew like a triangle, circle, or square or something like that. By ignoring the presented parts, regardless of the presented stimuli, this chart often drew their thematic parts. And then we thought that this kind of individual differences, as well as the developmental change from scribbling to their completion patterns, might be explained by the predictive coding, which was also discussed in this morning's sessions. And then first to simulate how the robot can also show their developmental change in the drawing patterns. We have designed the neural network model based on the predictive coding ideas. This is the small extension of the recurrent neural network model. We introduced the Bayesian inference module, which can integrate the bottom-up sensory signal with the top-down prediction based on the certainty of each signal. And we trained this network using these 6 drawing patterns, and afterwards we tested the network just by providing the 1/3 of the project of the training. Here, our interest was that how the developmental change and also the individual differences might be explained or reproduced by this neural network model. And our hypothesis was that the precision of the sensory input and also the precision of the top-down predictions might explain the developmental change and also the individual differences. For example, that in young children, the young children have limited the knowledge about the world and also the limited experience, sensing of experiences. This is why their infant predictions might be uncertain compared to their older children. So in this case, by modifying their parameter age, we could generate their uncertain prediction patterns. And the question is, how does their uncertainty or certainty of this prediction and also sensory signal will influence on the learning process? First, let me show you their behavioral result. You could see the differences between the normal flyer, the top-down predictions model, and also their hypo-flyer. The hypo means that they're weak predictions, they're more uncertain predictions model. And you can see that the normal flyer robot was very successful in adding the missing parts. In this case, the robot was drawing the face. But in contrast, the hypo-flyer model, the network often showed the sweeping patterns, which were also observed down to this. Here is the overall statistical analysis. We have modified the 2 parameters. One is the precision of the sensory signal. The other is the precision of the predictions of the predictions. And again, we could observe the developmental change and also the individual diversity by modifying these 2 parameters. For example, from the bottom left, you can see the splitting patterns. Although the network, the training was converged, but then even after the convergence of the training, the network showed this kind of splitting patterns. In contrast, when the precision of the sensation and the predictions for both are high, the network could successfully achieve the completion of the topic. And then interestingly, we observed the individual differences, like the misinterpretation of the intended patterns and also the tracing pattern with the higher sensory precisions. If the sensory precision is very high, while the precision of the cocktail prediction is low, the system would more strongly rely on the incoming sensory signal. In this case, the tracing behaviors of the existing line was first observed, whereas once the sensory signals are missing, the network could not successfully complete the missing. We think that although this is still qualitative, the comparison between the robot performance and the infant performance, we can show the correspondences between the robot development of the drawing and also in the previous slide you observed that the infant development drawing. And then this is a very new study, which is actually presented in the main conference ICDL. We conducted the human robot interaction experiment to observe how the human caregivers would modify their drawing patterns for child-like robot. We utilized the icon, as you know that the icon has a very nice child-like appearance, and also we implemented some such social gaze patterns, like looking at their participants or sometimes looking at the drawing, and then we compared the participants, the drawings in case of the social interaction with the individual drawing. And we observed the very similar phenomenon or modification in the drawing patterns. In front of the child by robot, participants of exaggerate their drawing. And also the stroke was a bit longer, which nicely corresponds to our finding in the object manipulation demonstrations. If you are interested in the more details, please attend their talks on May 2nd. The colleagues from IIT will give you the talk for the more detailed analysis results. And then finally, I'd like to mention about this is also our very recent study focusing on the regulation of the autonomy. In the previous two topics, we have focused more on the behavioral aspect, how the scaffolding behavior will change, and also how the infant, the drawing, or also the object manipulation performance changes. But now we want to look at the internal state of the baby's mind, how their autonomic nervous systems are also impacting each other. For those who are not so familiar with the autonomic nervous systems, we know that their autonomic nervous system consists of three types of their nerve system. One is their sympathetic nervous system, which mainly active during the daytime. When you are very active in doing the task or the work, this sympathetic nervous system becomes more active. In contrast, the parasympathetic nervous system is more active during the nighttime. When you feel relaxed, for example, the organ becomes more active. In this case, the parasympathetic nervous system. And one of the well-known reason of this parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system is called circadian rhythm. As you can see in this picture, sympathetic nervous system becomes more active during the day, while the parasympathetic nervous system becomes less activated. And then this changes in a positive way during the night. And usually this circadian rhythm should be observed if you are very healthy. But then sometimes, for example, the young children and also the person with autistic disorder often show unstable circadian rhythm. So our question is how this circadian rhythm of the autonomic nervous system may influence between their each other in the infant and the caregivers. So we collected the data, more than 50 pairs of the mother and infant, and then we applied the recurrence of analysis to first observe the nonlinear dynamics in their autonomic nervous system. From their ECG signal, which record their heartbeat signal, we first calculated the standard deviation of the endpoint interval. This is the interval between this peak. And also there are two indexes corresponding to the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And the recurrence plot is shown here. And usually the recurrence plot has their value 1 when their signals are corresponding to each other. So the x-axis and the y-axis, here we put the same SDNN signal of the inference. And then, of course, the diagonal axis always have the value 1. And then there, not only the diagonal axis, but also in their lower or the upper triangle have sometimes the value 1, which means that the same SDN value was observed in a different time point. And then there, as we are calculated this the recurrence plot using the 1 day long data from 10 p.m. to the next day 10 p.m., we can see, first visually see the circadian rhythm if they have the participants have the clear circadian rhythm. As I said, especially that during the nighttime, their heart rate, the variability becomes higher because of the parasympathetic nervous system, and then during the daytime, their circadian, their SDNN becomes lower. The variability becomes lower. So if their circadian rhythm is very clear, you can see the lower boxes here and the upper boxes here, which are clearly separated into 2 regions. This differences or the change during the daytime and nighttime becomes very visible if we compare the all subject data. On the left side, you can see the SDNN recurrence plot from the babies. And on the right side, you can see the mother's SDNN. You can just, by roughly comparing this infant group and mother group, you can see that the infant shows more clear circadian rhythm. You can see the clear boundaries between the bottom left corner and the top right corner. Whereas the mothers do not show such differences. So each one box showing the recurrence plot of the one mother. And you cannot see the clear differences, for example, here or here. You cannot see any boundaries inside the box, indicating that the SDNN, standard deviation of the NNE number, did not change during one. Here we did not directly analyze the correlations or the synchronization between the infant and mother, but then there, interestingly, we could observe that this SDNN or also the other indexes could nicely predict the parenting stress of the mothers. Not only the ECG signal, but their parenting stress was collected from the mother participants. And then we checked whether the parenting stress, the mother, was predicted by the recurrence analysis. And we found that not only the mother's ECG data, but also the infant ECG data could nicely predict the mother's stress, suggesting that the mother's stress is determined not only by their own autonomic nervous system, but also the baby's autonomic nervous system. So, which nicely showing that or indicating that there are close interactions between the infant and mothers after influence level, the autonomic nervous system may also be observed during their cognitive development. So to conclude, we have shown there are several studies that are addressing the research question of the interplay between the infant learning and the caregiver scaffolding. And the main research question was about the synchrony, and also the match modalities of the learning and scaffolding interactions. And we first found that the learning of the infant side is facilitated effectively by the scaffolding behaviors, whereas the scaffolding also changes through their development. And then interestingly, their multimodal signals, not only the sensory modal signals, but also the social cues, were started gradually utilized during consumption, especially in the older age, the babies becomes more sensitive to the social cues from the mothers. So it's nicely showing that not only the robot behaviors or infant behaviors, like the motor ability, but also the social cues like an gait or speech must be integrated in the robot learning mechanism. And then finally, I'd like to conclude my talk to advertise tomorrow's talk in the symposium sessions. So today I mainly talked about the interaction between the scaffolding and learning, but then we are very much interested in what kind of learning events in the brain enables the robot or artificial systems to acquire cognitive abilities. And in the last 2 decades, we have been focusing on the predictive coding ideas, which have been also talked in today's morning sessions. And so if you are interested in the predictive coding, the learning model, please join us for the tomorrow class. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you again, Professor Nagai. First of all, before seeing place, anyone has any question of any kind, just feel free. Also, people from remote, feel free to either write them in the chat, and then we can take them out loud, or just open your mic in case, or raise your hand if you want to be ordered. I can start because I have few questions, despite the fact that I already worked in your lab quite a while. The more thing I see, the more I have questions for interesting things. So my first one is, again, if I'm not mistaken, when you going back to the beginning, when you mentioned the interaction between infants and parents, like for the silencing attention, have you looked also in the same kind of interaction, but where the adult is not one of the parents? And in the case, have you seen differences in the way in which either the motions were shown to the babies, or in the way in which the babies reacted? I'm thinking now in the second study you presented with the, when you showed the motion of the baby, they were on point with the task or not. So I was curious about that.
So if the partner,
so if you see differences in the interaction between parents being the adult caregiver and people that are not the parents. So, for example, people from the lab, researchers that are not the adult interacting with the baby. I know it's not an easy thing to do because baby have attachments, so it's hard, but curious about that.
Sorry, thank you. In our study that we did not really compare the real parents or just an adult without the children. But there are some studies have been showing that, of course, that if there are the adults have their experiences of taking care of children, they show stronger. They show the stronger the emotional patterns for their babies. But down there, I think that the experiences of their having the babies is more important than like an attachment at least in the previous study.
That's very interesting, because when I think about human-robot interaction, for example, that's quite different, because you don't have the same level of attachment that you might have towards a baby. At least probably us as researchers might have some kind of behavior that's more parenting-like. But when we're thinking about robots interacting with people, and even back to the imitation learning that you showed at some point, I was also curious in that, seeing if there is this kind of difference between the way in which we present emotions we teach a robot versus a baby, because we're not their parents in the way in which interact with them.
I think the important thing is that whether the participants or the teacher side know what the learner can do or cannot do. For example, in our human-robot interaction, there are participants did not exaggerate their action demonstrations. But then after observing what robot can do or cannot do, for example, the robot dropped the object or just hit to another object. And then after realizing that what robot cannot do, the participants started exaggerating. So knowing what the learners can do is very important.
Yeah, that's it absolutely makes sense, because if you are interacting with a robot, not know beforehand the capabilities of it. Of course, you need to have this period in the middle which you need to understand the limitations of each other. That's very good. Thank you very much. Any question from the audience or remote? Right. Then we'll have another one on the very last part. Okay. On the very last part, so we're focusing a bit more on the rhythms, and the coordination between them. Do you really have any plans on how to integrate these with robots, or maybe for I don't know, because various ideas to how to implement it in robotics. How do you see maybe also using robots instead to study the effect of the circadian rhythm?
The circadian rhythm study. One challenge is that the robot does not have any autonomic nervous system.
But we can fake it, like
actually, we tried to simulate such like, for example, the heartbeat signals inside of their artificial models to see how their such a circadian rhythm can modify based because of their the psychiatric disorders, like autism spectrum disorders and disorders. I'm not so sure how it can be utilized in the human-robot interactions because in case of the humans interactions that we somehow can detect their partners, the circadian rhythm or their heartbeat signal by looking at their change in their facial colors and also their change in their pupil size. Through this kind of signal, we can somehow detect their internal state of the partners. But in case of robots, again, that we have to design such like a change in the pupil size or the change in their their features or colors and so on. So I'm not so sure whether such an artificially designed their representation of the circadian rhythm or the autonomic nervous system may have the impact on their interaction partner. That might be the good challenge.
It would be interesting to see. It's always the give and take that when you use robots at the end, you always have to either fake something or find different ways to express the same information. So I'm very curious to see if and how you manage to go on that route and see. Maybe for the interactions.
I just remembered the study we conducted, which is not about our autonomic nervous system, but that we looked at the eye blink behaviors. The eye blink behaviors is also somehow related to our cognitive performances, the processes. And then we observed that once the robots doing the eye blink, the humans start synchronizing their eye blink with the robot. Actually, that in their human interaction study, it's already known that the humans, especially the typically developed persons, often synchronize the eye blink, whereas the autistic individual do not synchronize the eye blink. So I think that the eye blink of the robot, although it's in a machine, but then the humans somehow start synchronizing their eye blink behaviors. So that might be the one starting point to start thinking about the autonomic nervous system interactions in the human robot.
Or even possibly the reverse. Like imagine if the robot detects a certain period of eye blinking in the human, could also instead adjust its own blinking to adjust to the human to maybe feel more aligned. Because you said that so you said you did not study already the correlation between infants and mothers circadian rhythm, but you showed that both of them are connected with the levels of stress. So do you plan also on trying to look at how they correlate with each other and see if that has connection to stress or any other form of?
Yeah, definitely. We try to look at the correlation. But the one challenge is that we could obtain the day-long the heartbeat signals, but then we did not utilize the camera or microphone to record the behaviors. So we don't know whether the babies and the mothers are staying together or separately. For example, the mothers were working in the kitchen, the babies were sleeping on the bed. But still, we can see some interactions between the babies and mothers' autonomic nervous system. That might be the interesting point, but also the limitation of our current study.
I suppose having to track with cameras and sensors and everything, finally for one or multiple days, it's quite an intense task. Also, you have to find people that agree to that, which I don't know about you. It's not always easy for good reasons. So thank you very much again. Any further questions? See your hand. Yes, please, thank you. Wait, we have a microphone. Let's see, because from people from remote, either you want to hold that with your ear. That's long job.
Not working.
It should be fine. Yes. So I have a question because as far as I know, for example, for vocalization, I think there's quite a lot of evidence showing that parents should actually not infantilize their vocalization, otherwise it impedes infant development or learning of language. So parents should better talk normally to their child rather than infantilize their vocalization. I think there's some work from Triesch and Melzo that are showing that infants were trying to reproduce the spectral pattern. And so I was wondering, in your experiments, if you try to evaluate the performance of the infant at the task after being shown by the parent, either in the slow with the slow instructions and or with the fast instructions. And I was wondering if maybe the important thing, for example, for the trajectories, if the important thing is not to exaggerate the trajectory and make them a lot broader. And maybe the important thing is the time, that if it's slower, but with the correct arc trajectory, maybe the infant will still learn better than if the trajectory is rough and in like straight line. But do you think there has been any research on that?
As far as I know, there is no like a systematic comparison between the different patterns of their emotions or moderates and how they impact on the infant learning. It's not so easy to like systematically control that type of behaviors. But at least in our interaction study, which takes like a few minutes of interactions, we could observe that the exaggerated performance can easily attract the baby's attention. If their mothers or fathers move very quickly, then it's not so easy to keep the attention of the baby. So I think that it has an impact on the infant learning, but then even if the mothers or fathers do not utilize the mothering or emotions, still the infant good learning impact. Even using their without their demonstrations, they come down with the explorations. So it's not the mandatory part, but then I think they're necessary part for facilitating. Thank you.
More questions? Curiosity runs. Oh, yes. Okay. That's all. I'll say thank you once again, Professor Nagai.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, let me just connect here. Move these. Well, okay, it's now the time for our talk from remote. So I would first check in if Magdalena, you are connected. I mean, I know you're connected, but can you hear us well again? And can we hear you? So if you can give us a sign. Well,
yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you people hear us? Try once again, please.
Yes, test. Hello, everyone.
A bit louder. Let me double check. Let me see if the audio is. Oh, yes. So, oh, way louder, but maybe less. Sorry. Try once again, please.
Yes. Hello, hello.
A bit louder. Third time.
Once again, hi.
What?
I can try.
I can change it.
No, I'm at maximum.
I think it's the one.
Maybe.
Okay, that's do you know if this is connected the speaker?
Oh, it's
That speaker.
ah, yes.
Is it one? Okay.
Right.
Once again, we will hear your voice for a couple of minutes, so why not start again? Once again, please, because we need to.
Hello.
Is it
I
better?
hope you can hear me.
Is it
Yes, can you hear me now?
Let's double checking Zoom if it is in these.
Clear now?
Sorry. If it is connected here, yes, it is. Wait. Video, audio.
Do you know?
Maybe on more and then audio settings.
More. I don't see audio settings in more.
Yeah, maybe there.
Maybe here.
Bottom audio settings.
Audio setting. Oh wait.
No, the very bottom.
Yes.
I don't know what is crossed.
I think it's the thing. Sure.
And then
I think so, but you can try.
I think it might be that one.
Us.
yeah, no, it's just
That's,
let her try now.
yeah. Once again, please.
Once again, hello.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
hear me?
Yeah. Is it too loud, people? Maybe.
Maybe, yes.
Maybe a bit too loud. All right. All right. Yeah. I think we have you. So
Okay, I hope I'm not screaming to you now.
we can get the volume lower. Don't worry. You scream as much as you want. And can we see? Yeah, of course, you see my screen. Sure. Okay, we can see you and can see your screen. That's wonderful. So let me just quickly introduce you. So please pardon me if I butcher your name, because I tend to do that. Is Magdalena Jordanova?
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. From Humboldt University. How was that?
Humboldt, yes.
Humboldt, close enough. University. And so she will be presenting a quite interesting research, which focuses in visual motor coordination, essentially, and self-organizing maps, and why does that happen, and how does that happen to align maps and refine predictions. So, but I don't want to steal too much of your time, so please go on. The floor is yours. And let me just focus on the people here.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for the very nice introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Magdalena Jordanova, and I'm very happy to be here and be able to attend this workshop. So greetings from Germany, from the rainy Berlin in the late evening here. Yeah, I couldn't come personally to the conference, so I'm very glad to still be able to exchange some ideas virtually at this workshop. So yeah, I'm an early stage PhD student at the Humboldt University, and yeah, my background is in computer engineering, but now my dissertation topic is continuous learning. So yeah, today I'm going to present you an idea about a memory feedback controller for lifelong sensory motor learning in humanoid robots. So let's begin. In the field of cognitive robotics, the presence of uncertainty, as you know, is very significant, and an adaptive system capable of learning and adapting to changes is very essential. So humanoid robots are social agents that engage in interactions not solely with external entities, such as other agents, humans, or the environment, but also fundamentally with their own physical bodies. So uncertainty may arise not just externally, but also from within the robot itself. Hence, a lifelong self-learning, as we call it, and self-monitoring process becomes essential to address this internal unpredictability. As human beings, we are curious creatures. And already in infancy, we engage in spontaneous exploration. These interactions exhibit coordination patterns aligning with the principles of coordination dynamics. So studies reveal that conscious agency in infants can emerge as a self-organizing process from a dynamic system that includes both the infant and their surroundings. So our research draws inspiration from brain plasticity, which undergoes continuous reorganization, influenced by factors like hand activity. It's very interesting for our case. So surgical interventions of the hand, like those addressing median nerve injuries through nerve repair, lead to synaptic changes in the brain cortex. Sensory re-education is crucial after procedures, as the brain undergoes a relearning process to enhance functional sensibility, involving touching and exploring items of increasing difficulty with eyes open or closed, using an alternative sense like vision to comprehend for deficient sensation. Created in the 80s, self-organizing maps, so-called SOMs, have the ability to intuitively represent intricate data sets by mapping high-dimensional data into a lower-dimensional grid. Shilache et al. Investigated the use of dynamic self-organized maps, what I'll be referring the whole time as DSOMs, allowing online learning and adaptation. So in this work, we adopted their methodology of learning visual motor coordination. Their approach consists of two dynamic self-organizing maps, one for the head, pulsing the vision, the robot's camera, and another for the arm, representing the selector motor group. Additionally, there are having links connecting neurons between both DSOMs. Each neuron is associated with a weight that corresponds to the joint angles of the respective body part. The weights of the neurons in the arm DSOM include shoulder pitch, shoulder roll, elbow yaw, and elbow roll, while in the head DSOM, head yaw, and head pitch. The learning process comprises two parallel activities. So we have the training both DSOMs based on random arm movements, what we call motor babbling, and the Hebbian learning paradigm reinforcing connections between those DSOMs. So the self-organizing structure of the DSOMs is facilitated by a learning function responsible for adjusting neural weights according to input patterns. So these are the random arm configurations, and the neighborhood function, which specifies the impact of neighboring neurons in the updating process. The Hebbian process is inspired by biological principles reflecting the concept that neurons that fire together wire together. Simulating synapse behavior, the interneuronal links are strengthened when the robot's end effector is visible. An illustration of the visual motor coordination process is shown on the right, where the arm and head neurons are arranged in 2D lattices and interconnected by Hebbian links, depicted with varying thicknesses for indicate their strength. The lattice was kept two-dimensional, mostly for simplicity and better comprehension. A notable characteristic of this approach is its resilience to distortion. So we mostly look at motor perturbation or tool changes. And this enables real-time adaptation and ensures effective coordination. In this work, we employed a model designed for lifelong sensory motor self-learning, having sensory motor coordination, what I presented till now, not as an end goal, but as a feedback controller during the execution of specific tasks such as pointing or reaching. For the sake of simplicity, and as a demonstration of the concept, we exclusively relied on visual feedback. The model is capable of recognizing and addressing uncertainty while also retaining memory of states to facilitate quicker adaptation, like in scenarios involving motor perturbation or tool use. Dynamic self-organizing maps are employed to build the internal sensory motor model of the robot needed for the coordination. We explore the range of tasks sensitive to distortions that can be effectively performed with the memory-embedded controller without narrowing down and training the model for any specific task. So using the before-mentioned visual motor coordination model as a basis, here we initially train it offline without any motor perturbation or tool change. And subsequently, during the online phase, where uncertainties may arise, we slightly change the model by keeping the head DSOM fixed. So this allows us, through flattening the model representation into a single network, sorted by head joint angles and considering the Hebbian links, to compare states before and after perturbations and extract valuable information to save in the controller's memory. So the whole framework is categorized into three primary sections: the creation and reshaping of this visual motor coordination model, the core program logic, the task that you want to do, and the adjustment ensuring efficient adaptivity. So let's see more detail the concrete steps of the framework's methodology. We initiate the process by loading the offline pre-trained model and restructuring the two dynamic self-organizing maps, so one for the arm and one for the head, along with the Hebbian links into a unified DSOM. This transformation involves extending the neuron weights of the head DSOM by the arm configurations associated with the strongest connections. We refer to this patched dynamic self-organizing map as the original joint DSOM, serving as, so to say, our template. It is worth noting that reverting the reshaping process to two distinct DSOMs will not result in a loss-free reconstruction. So after creating a duplicate of this combined representation, denoted as the current joint DSOM, we proceed with the primary task, detecting the color the robot is pointing to, requiring the robot to keep the green end effector of its right arm in the middle of its field of view. Initially, using the offline trained model, the system functions as expected. However, suppose the system unexpectedly alters its behavior due to factors like motor perturbation or tool changes, disrupting the porting task success. In that case, the system detects this error and triggers a correction mechanism. The correction mechanism involves initially examining the controller's memory, which comprises a collection of identified disparities from the original joint DSOM. So initially, the memory is devoid of any information, prompting the process to advance to the next step, call it recalibration. This entails initially a motor babbling behavior of the robot's right arm, akin to the offline phase, to acquire coordination skills based on the current DSOM and Hebbian links, which in this case are still the original ones. Notably, the head DSOM remains fixed during the relearning process, allowing only the arm DSOM and the synaptic-like links to be updated. It is essential to highlight that despite the motor babbling in the offline phase, during the online reorganization, the robot learns to position its end effector at the center if its field of view, instead of directing its gaze directly at the end effector. Consequently, the robot adjusts its arm position rather than its head position, typically employed in tracking object tasks. So our focus is specifically on acquiring knowledge about the errors in the arm joints, and the visual-motor coordination serves as a control mechanism rather than being the ultimate objectives, thereby distinguish its acquisition process. Following the relearning of coordination and restructuring of the model into a combined DSOM, a comparison between this updated version and the original one is possible. The comparison involves calculating the element-wise mean mu and variance sigma square over the differences in their arm joint configurations, resulting in a 4x2 matrix representing the calculated distortion of the robot's four-joint arm, which is then stored in a memory. Subsequently, the task execution resumes, and if another distortion occurs, the system checks the memory by adding each 4D mean vector to the original arm DSOM to determine if the task can be resumed. This facilitates quicker tasks resumption following recurring changes in the system. The two primary interconnected tasks are determining the distortion and establishing criteria for when actually the coordination is considered learned or sufficiently suitable for the task. Criteria such as the frequency of anti-effector detection within a defined time window or its average proximity to the center of the field of view can be employed. Given that the perturbation is calculated as the mean of the difference among the arm joint configurations, we also compute the variance and opt to utilize it as a threshold serving as a criterion. We employ visual motor coordination as a mechanism to assess task accuracy. Specifically, we have selected the task of determining the color of which the robot is pointing, referring to the color directly behind the end effector in relation to the orientation of the robot's head. This straightforward scenario is inspired by the developmental behavior observed in children exploring the world as they draw their parents' attention by, for example, pointing towards different objects, seeking to understand what those objects are, respectively, what colors they have. We chose a straightforward task to avoid incorporating additional mechanisms, such as object detection, which could divert attention from the actual main point. The images that you see on the left show the humanoid robot Aldebaran now in a simulated colored room within the Robotics Webbot simulator, involved in a task of identifying the color it is pointing to. Throughout motor perturbation and tool change, it ensures that the green marker in its arm or tool stays positioned at the center of its visual field. The disturbance involves shifting the arm motor command vector. The available tools include a short tool, long tool, what we call an L-shaped tool, or no tool at all, where the robot uses just its hand. In this example scenario, the visual arm coordination is pre-trained offline exclusively with the short tool, leaving the robot unaware of the other two options. The color detection task starts with the known tool and undergoes unexpected changes. A green marker is attached to the tip of each tool, and in the absence of a tool, so when it's just hand, encapsulates the entire hand for optimal visibility from each arm rotation. In the event of a misalignment between the marker and the camera view, an automatic recalibration is initiated involving a memory check and, if necessary, engaging in random motor bubbling until the task can resume properly. So the concept behind the choice of tool use is to consider the tools as extensions of the robot's hand, allowing for the examination of potential body modifications that may arise. This notion draws inspiration from the analogy to human joints, which undergo changes over time, such as growth during development or modifications resulting from accidents that may necessitate the replacement of a joint with an artificial one, potentially having a different shape. Robots similarly may encounter challenges on difficult terrains, and the ability to continue performing their tasks, even, for example, with a missing joint or a replaced joint at the last minute, without calibration due to time constraints, becomes essential for their functionality and adaptability. So let's examine just an illustrative, not data-driven yet, instance highlighting the efficacy of incorporating a memory component in our approach. It's important to mention that just for visualization clarity, each state in the memory is identified not by the calculated distortion of the robot's arm joints relative to the original pre-trained coordination model, but rather by a descriptive label such as the name of the tool in use. However, in reality, the system cannot refer the state label from the stored data. So the depicted scenario involves the robot initially employing a familiar tool short, successfully completing the task without issues, followed by an unforeseen motor disturbation that results in that results in the use of a modified version of the tool. We refer to it as tool short prime because it's not a different tool, it's slightly changed perceived because of the perturbation. So this prompts a recalibration process that involves mainly motor babbling. Upon learning and adapting the visual-motor coordination, it can resume the task, saving the established differences between the updated and the original joint DSOM in its memory. Subsequently, while the perturbation persists, it encounters another tool. So let's call it tool long prime, not present in its memory. So it triggers another round of memory check and relearning, the duration of which can, of course, differ. After returning to the main task, in a subsequent tool change back to tool short prime, the robot recognizes the presence in the memory, promptly adjusting its coordination without the need for further recalibration through bubbling, thus smoothly continuing the task. Now let's discuss the preliminary results, the setup limitations, and possible future development. The performance of the framework depends on the whole recalibration process. However, the novelty of this approach lies in the utilization of a memory-embedded controller rather than the process of bubbling and coordination model adapting. It takes roughly 2 seconds to check a memory entry, whereas updating the coordination model through bubbling again takes minutes. To prevent the memory from becoming excessively large, we enforce catastrophic forgetting in a first-in, first-out fashion. In the two-use scenario, we constrain the size to a maximum of 4 states, allowing for up to 4 tools or fewer depending on unexpected motor perturbation. So due to the manageable memory size, the time taken for memory checks also remains within reasonable limits and is much shorter than relearning from scratch. However, to compute the mean difference in arm configurations, it is necessary, visually speaking, to align the joint DSOMs while maintaining the sequence of head configurations. The creation of a joint DSOM involves adding the arm weight with the highest connection strength to the head weight. However, multiple connections may share the same strength, meaning that for the same head position, there could be several arm configurations, all leading to the end effector being approximately at the center of the field of view. When you're shaping both the original and updated DSOMs, a common method of selection is required, as a random choice would not yield accurate results. Assuming that both the pre-trained coordination and the online updated one are sufficient for the robot to keep the end effector within a small error range around the center of the camera, one possible approach is to consistently choose the arm configuration that would place the end effector at the nearest point in space towards the robot, thus introducing a depth criterion. In cases where ambiguity persists, utilizing the variance as a criterion supported by a sufficient amount of collected data should sufficiently address any uncertainties in these circumstances. We employ sensory motor coordination as a feedback controller. So the camera serving as a sensor, providing 2D images. Having a 2D controller limits, of course, our capabilities to perform tasks that do not require depth information, such as random pointing behavior or reaching without considering the depth with respect to the robot's orientation towards the end effector. We incorporate both motor perturbation and tool change, a source of system uncertainty. It is crucial to know that our focus is not on identifying the distinctions between the tools themselves in 3D space. Instead, our emphasis is on learning the motor arm translation error associated with these changes. This implies that the effectiveness of the task relies significantly on well-learned coordination and optimal data distribution within the accessible space of the robot. An insufficient coordination model could lead to errors in the model being mistakenly attributed to simulated perturbations. Furthermore, learning the mean difference per arm joint between two states necessitates maintaining minimal variance values. Given the infinite ways of accurately adjusting the arm to restore this coordination, this may entail a longer calibration process, and additional measures may be required to enforce variance minimization and prevent stagnation. However, once the relearning is completed, it could, for instance, enable much swifter tool changes. We aimed to begin with a minimal and straightforward approach, and the subsequent study could build upon that foundation and address all the mentioned limitations comprehensively. A forthcoming work could, for example, examine the use of alternative sensors for learning sensory motor coordination, possibly 3D sensors to overcome the task limitation inherent in using a 2D camera image. Additionally, the study could delve into examining neurogenesis within the coordination model, so removing the necessity of predefining the lattice of dynamic self-organizing map. More complex model could be tested by increasing the depth of the neural networks, as well as different spike timing dependent of these two rules could be employed. Furthermore, scaling the problem and including enforced catastrophic forgetting within the memory component of the controller is worth more extensive exploration. And what we would like to stress is that through these endeavors, a crucial consideration is to prioritize and incorporate principles of explainability and transparency whenever possible. And finally, conducting experiments in real-world scenarios may reveal new limitations and provide fresh insights. So we introduced an innovative approach aimed at tackling the challenges associated with lifelong sensory motor learning in humanoid robots, particularly when unforeseen alterations occur in the robot's physical structure. This methodology draws inspiration from biological mechanisms incorporating principles of self-learning, exploration, and coordination dynamics. Central to our approach is the utilization of dynamic self-organizing maps, the DSOMs, subject to synaptic-like reorganizational changes and interconnected through Hebbian links. This interconnected structure is harnessed to learn visual arm coordination, subsequently employed as a feedback controller with an inherent reliance on memory embeddedness. The efficacy and adaptability of our proposed framework are highlighted in dynamic and uncertain scenarios, particularly those involving, as I mentioned, motor perturbation or tool change handled as perturbation. We contend that the utilization of self-learning as a bio-inspired memory-embedded controller holds significant promise within the realm of transparent, open-ended learning for humanoid robots. And with this, even though I was faster than expected, I would like to thank you all for listening and would very much appreciate any questions, feedback, or comments and ideas that can help me develop this further and to reach me now or later on. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Magdalena. First of all, questions from the audience. Yes. I have one question up there behind. I don't know if you can see.
So from what I understood, your success was simply having the effector at the center of the image. But have you looked at the redundancy of the solutions? Did you notice anything interesting about how the arm was angled and the poster that was used to resolve the problem, especially when you start to add tools of maybe different sides?
Could you hear the question, first of all?
Can I ask that maybe you will repeat it? I couldn't very good hear, just separate words, I'm sorry.
Here. Sorry, we are experimenting with microphones and probably from remote does not work so well. Sorry for the job.
So I was wondering about the redundancy of your solutions, since from what I understood, you have the goal and the success is based on the end effector being in the center of the vision. But have you looked about the redundancy of the solutions, because it can be reached like this, or maybe I do it like this, especially if I have a tool, it gives a lot more flexibility, or maybe, well, to some extent. So have you looked a bit into that, or did you focus only on the end effector success and not so much in the actual posture of the robot?
Yeah, that's a very good question. About redundancy, I've looked into the problem that it could be reached to the different depth, but it could be reached from different positions. That is a point that I should consider. I haven't looked into that, because for the scenario that we were using, for enough data, it should be neglectable when you base when you have this criterion about looking at the variance. But it's a very good point. Yeah, I definitely will look into that. I've thought only about the depth problem, but it could be also reached from different angles. That's true.
I was thinking, especially if you have that memory thing, it would be very interesting if you could show that the solution ends up being very stable in posture as well. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, this would be very cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any follow-up question? Well, so I'll use mine. So thank you once again, first of all. So I know you mentioned that you already started thinking about ways to make memory more efficient, the access to memory. And for now, you said that you're essentially a first in, first out queue, if I understood correctly. But do you have any other insights into how perhaps you can expand that memory, or even change the way in which you deal with the previous memories to make it quicker or allow more space to be used for the future?
Yeah, this is definitely something that I'm going to work on. I don't have much idea right now on that. I would try to. I mean, it will be nice if you can some kind of categorize the tools and see if you're using the same tool but with very slightly perturbation, because probably you want to save the tools that you had to use them again, but you don't want to save a perturbation because probably it won't occur exactly the same way, so that there is no perturbation from some reason. So there should be some criteria what it's more important and what should stay for longer time. Yeah.
Because I mean, the last thing you said is that even if you use the same tool, the perturbation might not be the same, and that makes all sense. Because like imagine a robot in a real scenario picking up a hammer, like the specific point in which the robot picks up the hammer, along the handle does change the way in which balance is distributed and whatever. So for sure, that's not an easy task that you were mentioning. So kudos on that, and keep us updated in case you will have more on that.
Thank you.
And I was thinking also, because right now you mentioned that main focus is on tool use, but one other aspect in which I see this, possibly applied is also to share resources among different robots that are similar enough body structure, let's say, but with differences. Like thinking again to the ICAP robot that I used a bit. There are like 40 something of the same robots around the world, but anyone has slight differences in the way in which it was built, in ways in which it does coordinate or small misalignments. And so have you looked also about the possibility of like trying to understand not much in the tool use, but perhaps slightly different body scheme, let's say, of robots, but using or reusing previously existing maps, with those slightly embodied differences?
Yeah, so the idea is there is nothing predefined, so this should be able to work also on another robot because I'm not using any kinematics. The robot doesn't know anything about their joints. So I can imagine that you mentioned this sharing experience. This could be interesting when you let the other robot of a different shape first learn these initial sums, these initial maps, and then the first robot I can imagine, share just the perturbation, just this actually what it saved in the memory, because I'm saving for now actually the errors, not what the joints were before. So it would be very cool if with another type of robot sharing the memory, it works. Yeah, it will be a very nice extension. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any last curiosity questions? Anything? Okay, so thank you once again, Magdalena.
Thank you for having me.
So, okay, perfect. Okay, so we will have now a small, actually, yeah, slightly small break up until 4 p.m., in which we will have the second invited speaker, Jochen Triesch. So I know there's coffee.
We don't know if it's coffee.
We have something.
It's something there. So
we're in the US.
yeah.
Let's call it coffee or something adjacent.
No,
right?
I don't know what it is. It's water and something, maybe coffee.
Water and something down there. So the first one to try, let us know if you survive and how it is. We have coffee, we have water and something over there. So feel free to take that. The camera is having a lot of fun, apparently. Yeah. So feel free to take it, water and everything, and please take this time to make questions, even among yourselves, because I will be around asking people what you do and why you're here. So be prepared for that. Have fun and relax a bit until 4. Yes.
And then you
And then from there,
okay, with a little delay. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Let me
Okay,
actually
no,
call.
yeah.
Oops.
How do I? In which order?
Let me just stay, please.
Sure.
Just replicate the screen there. I don't remember
okay.
what it is. Thank you. It's been a while since I last used Windows.
Is it?
Time disconnect. Yeah. The old SA. Yeah. Yes. Wonderful. Okay. Let me see if we can.
So what does this look like?
That's good.
Yeah, I think we can
Why your
just the presentation. Immersive is what?
immersive?
Immersive, I don't know.
No. No. So complicated. Here, just I tweet that with the side-by-side speaker. The speaker is not the one sharing the screen is not the one.
Do you know how? Okay.
I think it's fine. further. If you want, yes, you can use that. It should be already not already on.
Yeah. Okay.
Repeat that. And these can go into the audience.
Okay.
The audience is not.
And I think it's just turn on. Do you know how to use that?
Yes, just it's already on.
I just switched it on.
Yeah, it's on.
Seems to work.
Okay, so first of all, hi again, everybody. If you know anyone that's currently not here and was before, sorry for them. You can run very quickly to grab them, but yes, very few time. So we now pass to the second debate talk, which is Professor Jochen Triesch. I will probably butcher your name, so sorry about that. It's fine.
Perfect.
Well, awesome, thank you. So I'll also read these because you people keep doing a lot of stuff and I can't remember all of your careers. So sorry about that. Thank you for doing that. So Professor Triesch got his diploma and PhD from physics, as you mentioned this morning, from Bochum University. Is that right, the name? In Germany. Postdoctoral fellow at Computer Science Department at Rochester, as we saw, probably you also saw this morning in New York City, USA. And he joined the Faculty of Cognitive Science Department at San Diego, USA, as an assistant professor in 2001. In 2005, he became a fellow of the Frankfurt Institute for Advanced Studies, FIAS, in Frankfurt. And in 2006, he received the Marie Curie Excellence Center Award of the European Union. From 2007, he is the Johanna Quandt Chair of Theoretical Life Science at FIAS, and also has a professorship at the Department of Physics and Department of Computer Science and Mathematics at the Goethe University of Frankfurt. So quite a lot of stuff. You like to keep yourself busy, I see. So, he already mentioned that he will give quite an interesting talk today, which I'm very curious about, delving into consciousness, which is always a fun topic to touch in these kind of studies, especially when we talk about robots. So I'm very curious to hear what you will have to say. So I leave the floor to you. Thank you very much. And for any question, of course, wait until the end.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Letizia, and also Anna for organizing this. This is a lot of fun, and I'm in fact very excited, also a little nervous because I haven't been talking about these ideas that I'm going to present before in public. So this should be fun. We'll see. Here's the outline of my presentation. So yeah, consciousness is a very difficult topic. And I'm going to start by giving a bird's eye overview of consciousness research. Not going into any details really, but trying to sort of put us on the same page as to where this complicated and diverse field stands. And then I'm going to make a bold proposal as to what I think, how we should try to understand consciousness and what sort of building blocks it might really be composed of, and how that gives rise to really a space of possible consciousnesses, and how we might want to study the development of consciousness and explore this space of possible consciousnesses with a research platform that we've been developing in the lab that is called MIMO, which stands for Multimodal Infant Model. So this is roughly what I'll try to do. So let's start with a bird's eye view of consciousness research. And I guess it's useful to start with the question, why should we study consciousness at all? And the first answer that comes to mind is, well, we're curious, we're scientists, and this seems to be one of the deepest mysteries in all of science. Why do we have conscious experience? What do we even mean when we say that? And what makes studying consciousness even more pressing, I would say, is that as AIs are becoming more advanced, everybody starts talking about the possibility of AIs becoming conscious, or maybe already being conscious, or so we better come to terms with an understanding of consciousness and what it might take for machines to be conscious, if that's possible at all. And then, of course, many people are concerned about the potential risks of such a step of building conscious AIs. But there may also be benefits. And we talk about risks and benefits. That means we're really asking some ethical questions, such as, is suffering in machines possible? And if so, could we avoid it? And could conscious AIs maybe even be even more harmful to societies than non-conscious AIs may already be in different contexts when in the hands of bad actors? And is it maybe even harder to control AIs if they are conscious, if they have consciousness? So I think there are lots of good reasons, therefore, to study this, but of course, it's hard. And one of the reasons that makes it so hard is that we don't even really know what we're talking about. Even defining consciousness is a very tricky business, to the extent that there still doesn't exist a widely accepted definition of what the term really means. And in a sort of, if you look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which has lots of good entries on lots of things, they kind of throw their hands in the air a little bit and say conscious and consciousness are umbrella terms that cover a wide variety of mental phenomena used with a diversity of meanings. Conscious is heterogeneous in its range, being applied both to whole organisms and to particular mental states and processes. And I took this quote from a recent paper, Storm et al., that you see there at the bottom. So that is a bit of a frustrating state of affairs, I would say. And if you read papers or books on consciousness, there are lots of things out there on the market. You'll see things like, yeah, it's about what it is like to experience something, having inner experiences or subjective experiences. There's this notion of qualia, awareness is a term that comes up often. But yeah, so often, right, how do we even define these other terms without making recourse to other terms that are equally hard to define? It's a bit of a mess, I would say. And then it's maybe not surprising that there's also a zoo of theories of consciousness out there. And again, I'm sort of following multiple papers that try to summarize and categorize different classes of theories. There's a popular proponent called the global neuronal workspace theory by Bars and others. This morning already we learned about predictive processing, predictive coding. So there's some ideas that this might also be sort of a central aspect of consciousness. Recurrent processing theories emphasize the importance of recurrence in the brain for giving rise to conscious experiences. There are theories that look more at the details of processing in individual neurons, called, for example, dendritic integration theory. There are higher order theories of consciousness that really focus on more things like metacognition and the self-referential nature, that we can think about our own thinking and emphasize this as being sort of a hallmark and defining feature of consciousness, and other things. And yeah, so there's a zoo of theories out there. And why would that be the case? Well, to me, it seems rather obvious that if there's no universally accepted definition of a thing, then, well, different theories can just easily focus on different facets of the problem. If it's really some umbrella term that's used in many different ways, that right, theory A will focus on this aspect or facet and theory B on that one. And that is not really a problem at all, but it becomes a problem if these are theorized, advertised as theories of consciousness rather than theories of some particular facet of consciousness. And that leads to a lot of unnecessary debate, confusion, and argument in the field. And my perspective is a little that many theories of consciousness, or rather facets of consciousness, may in fact be quite correct in describing one or the other facet of the phenomenon. But yeah, authors might use them as competing. There's another reason for such a zoo of theories, which is that you might have different motivations when studying consciousness. One focusing more on the abstract computational essence, what really are the computations that we want to label with this term, versus the implementation of the brain, what in the brain gives rise to our conscious experiences. And another thing that contributes to confusion is, moving targets. So several authors tend to, and it's kind of natural, I believe, they extend their theories over the years to incorporate aspects from other theories, and then you don't quite know what they're really talking about because there are a gazillion versions that all have a similar name. Now, what do we do with all this? A very basic question to ask is, how should we conceptualize consciousness given all the things I've said before? And our language use kind of suggests that it might be something somewhat binary, right? You're conscious, you're unconscious. There are two things going on. But then other theories like this integrated information theory that was on a previous slide try to argue that it's really kind of a scalar number that can range over certain values. And so that might be something graded. And if you subscribe to the view that there are really many different facets to consciousness, then you might think of it as something much more high dimensional, where different dimensions describe to what extent different facets of the phenomenon are expressed in a particular agent. I find one analogy extremely helpful here, and Kevin O'Regan, who many of you know, who's also quite active in this community, he has been discussing this in his book from 2011, which I highly recommend. And the situation there is that defining life, the phenomenon of life, is also very difficult. Wikipedia says, for example, that it can be descriptively defined by the capacity for homeostasis, organization, metabolism, growth, adaptation, response to stimuli, and reproduction. So again, a whole sort of range of different facets that we all associate with the notion of life. But these facets are usually expressed simultaneously. And if you think about it, this is the one and only reason why it makes sense to use a word such as life, although it stands for such a really set of diverse but coupled phenomena, right? If these could all frequently occur in this or this other constellation, different things being absent or present, it wouldn't make sense to use the notion of life. It only makes sense because all these things typically co-occur. It's a statistical property almost. So, and then of course there are borderline cases like viruses or the kinds of things we build in synthetic biology, where we can now create all sorts of unicellular organisms or so that don't want to reproduce anymore, things like that. So I'm very much in line with what Kevin thinks, that probably consciousness is best understood as something similar to life that has many different facets that usually co-occur, but that don't necessarily have to always co-occur. Now, any theory of consciousness ultimately has to give a satisfying account of three kinds of transitions. There's the phylogenetic transition, right? Our very ancient ancestors were some amoeba or so, where few of us would argue that there was a lot of consciousness going on in there. But somewhere along the phylogenetic pathway that led to Homo sapiens, right, here it's clearly there. So, right, some transition, right? We need some satisfying account of how it got into the system during evolution, and similarly during our ontogenetic environment. The single fertilized egg cell probably has not much that is sort of worth calling consciousness compared to our human adult consciousness. But somewhere along the way, something comes in. Now, if you think of consciousness as something rather binary, well, that sort of forces you to pinpoint a particular time where, right, it starts being there. So that might be not very handy, but if you think of this as something being more graded or even multi-dimensional with lots of dimensions that can be graded, it will be much easier to accommodate for like various kinds of transitions that go on. And then finally, there are rapid transitions. All right, we go from conscious to unconscious, maybe because of some anesthesia that we get or a hit to the head or something like that. And these transitions that are probably the origin of this language use, conscious versus unconscious, but any theory of consciousness would also have to sort of explain what is going on there. Now, so much, right, for the big bird's eye view of the state of the field. And now we're going to get a little bit more into the meat. So, okay, I prepared you for believing me that it might actually be this multi-dimensional phenomenon, but what might be those putative building blocks or facets of consciousness? Now, I want to ask you a question here. In fact, I'm going to ask you two questions. And the first question is looking quite innocent. What is the function of consciousness? And why do you think this might be a question worth asking? The argument goes as follows. Consciousness is there, we have it. And since we are the product of evolution, our consciousness is a product of evolution, and therefore it must have a certain function. Sounds logical? Sounds good? Makes sense to you? Sorry? I like that comment very much. Here's the second perspective. Evolution has optimized our reproductive success. That's clear. For this, it was helpful to endow us with improved cognitive abilities, functional building blocks. Our consciousness may be just an emergent property and byproduct of these improved cognitive functions. What are these functional building blocks and how do different facets of consciousness emerge from them? So this is very much in line to what you just said, right? And I think this is in fact a much better view. And it's a view that allows us to start a fairly pragmatic research program to answer these questions. Because with the first question there, what is the function of consciousness? What are you going to do with this? It's hard to think about how we can turn this into some empirical or theoretical research program. At least I don't see much of a way of doing something there. While for the second perspective, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that can we do, and I'm going to tell you what we hope to be doing in the future. Now, specifically, what I like about this second perspective is that it permits a kind of divide and conquer strategy. If you think of consciousness as like emerging from different building blocks, well, you can ask questions like, what are these building blocks? How can we characterize them? How can we put them together? What happens if we put A, B, C, or D together? Do we already see something that looks like consciousness? There's lots of stuff we can do if we subscribe to this perspective and ask this question. So the idea is a bit similar maybe to a paper that I like a lot, or yeah, let's say a lot, that has been sitting on archive for the last year and a half or so. And it's written by mostly philosophers, but also Joshua Bengio is there. Some neuroscience folks are in there. And the title is Consciousness and Artificial Intelligence, Insights from the Science of Consciousness. And their idea is basically looking at different theories of consciousness and extracting what they call indicators. So facets, features of these theories of consciousness that these theories argue are important aspects of consciousness. And then asking to what extent current AI systems might already possess these kinds of indicators, and making the argument that a system that meets many of these indicators may be more likely to inhibit consciousness. So they're not sort of very bold saying, okay, a system that has all these indicators will be consciousness, also that these indicators are sufficient, but they're a little bit careful and say, if you have these indicators, there's a higher probability that you might have something like consciousness. And I'm going to show you the list of indicators that they've come up with here. And it's sort of a long list. I think it's 14 or 15 in total. And they relate to some of those classes of theories that I talked about at the beginning. So there are these recurrent processing theories that mostly talk about phenomena in visual perception. That's sort of what their origin is. And they highlight the importance of recurrent processing in visual cortex for making some visual stimulus or making you become aware of a visual stimulus, while in some feed-forward network where it might just go unnoticed. So input modules generating organized, integrated perceptual representations. And there's this global workspace theory that basically says, right, there are many independently operating or specialized processing modules for vision, for audition, but then how we create, and that's sort of one of the things that this theory tries to explain and focus on, how we create a unified experience, a unified conscious experience, is that there's this sort of limited capacity workspace, and the contents of that is what we are sort of consciously aware of. And the contents of this workspace can be broadcast to all these modules, and then there's a particular ignition mechanism that will select things that from the individual modules that can go into this global workspace. So, they extract from this here these indicators of having a global broadcast, state-dependent attention, and so forth. For these higher order theories, right, they focus more on these self-reflexive aspect, metacognitive monitoring, so thinking about thinking or monitoring whether your perceptions are in fact real. So different aspects that are emphasized by this. And then there are other things that I don't want to go through this entire list with you, but I do recommend that if any of you is interested in consciousness and the possibility of consciousness in AIs, it's actually a fun read, although it's over 80 pages, but worthwhile reading. Now, so contrast that with my tentative list of building blocks. And disclaimer, this is work in progress. Maybe next week I would have a slightly different list for you. So take this with several grains of salt. But also, I think ultimately we will realize that it's a matter of choice what building blocks we put in there. And I'll get back to that point because, right, as I said, it's not clear how to define consciousness in this to start with. So by defining it via some computational building blocks, we actually have a choice of what building blocks we want to include to define, you know, what we want to call conscious or not. So what I think is one essential thing for me are motivation mechanisms that promote behavior in the absence of external prompts, including the autonomous definition and selection of goals. If you think of something like a ChatGPT, it will react to prompts, and that's what it does, but it doesn't think about what it could do next, and, you know, and without a particular prompt or task given to it. One thing that I see as essential is also mechanisms to coordinate different cognitive and body resources to achieve such self-defined goals. And coordination can be many things. This can be, one particular implementation of coordination might be such a global workspace, as some of these theories argues, but also the presence of having goals that for some longer or shorter amount of time coordinate all behavior to subserve those goals is also a mechanism to coordinate different resources for one single function. Then, of course, it doesn't suffice to have coordination mechanisms, but you need to, in fact, learn how to coordinate things properly. And you want to be able to plan coordinated behaviors. And another thing that I think is extremely important, and that then maybe ties into predictive coding ideas, are mechanisms to represent uncertainty, and something that I call the ability to ask questions. And when I say that, I don't mean anything that has anything to do with language, but I mean the ability to define the goal of reducing a particular instance of uncertainty. So if you think about it, there's endless amount of things we are uncertain of, right? I mean, in fact, there are many more things we're uncertain of than we can be certain about. But not all this uncertainty really matters to us and interests us, but sometimes we are, we're basically, that's the postulate, we're trying to focus our cognitive resources on reducing a particular instance of uncertainty. So I like the notion of goal. So you could say, well, we initiate or define a goal of reducing a particular instance of uncertainty. And that's, for me, what it means to ask a question. And next kind of building block is learning a hierarchy of abstract causal models of the external world, the body, sensory motor contingencies when we interact with this world, and also models of our own cognitive processes, so self-modeling. And all this greatly benefits from the ability for embodied interaction because it allows you to permit interventions, to probe the causal structure of the world by doing experiments. And to top it up, 7 is always a good number, an autobiographical memory system that supports the above abilities. So I let this sit there for a second, allow you to breathe. That's a lot of text on one slide. What do we do with this? So the strong claim would be that if we do the following, we identify the right implementations of these 7 building blocks, and we integrate them in the right way into an embodied agent, and give this agent time to interact and learn, then we will observe the emergence of something that is worth calling consciousness. This agent will develop subjective experiences, and it will feel like something to be that agent. That's a bold claim, but we can also call it a hypothesis. But it's a hypothesis that can be easily adapted. If you think there's something important missing here, well, add it to the list, put it in, try it out. Mate. I will get to that. I'll get to that. That's a great question. Well, that would require language. And if we're thinking about pre-verbal infants and whether they're already conscious or not, or animals, right? I mean, there's a big debate as to whether one should make any definition of consciousness relying on verbal report, because that excludes like so many organisms, species. Okay, so good. Think of that what you want, but of course there's a problem. It's nice to write down such a list, but there's uncertainty about the list of these building blocks. And there are countless ways of implementing them, right? If I say I want to write an autobiographical memory or motivation system, what does that even mean, right? It could be tons of different implementations of them. And each of these building blocks could be made more or less powerful. Like, okay, how much memory of what and what capacity and right? And there are countless ways of trying to integrate these building blocks into cognitive architectures. So, okay, what do we make with that? Well, I would say the sort of best perspective is to say, well, yeah, there are countless ways of implementing these kinds of building blocks and integrating them. Let's just be open and say that this gives rise to an entire space of possible expressions of consciousness. There's consciousness as it is, as we see it in healthy humans, but there's also consciousness as it could be when maybe one or the other building block is still poorly developed or so. So to make this concrete, right, we can think of these different arrows here as dimensions in this sort of building block space. And let's say one of them is for motivation. Well, we have a choice of what we want to have there. It could be a very poorly developed motivation mechanism that makes the agent have a single objective that it tries to do all the time, but it could also be something very fancy that leads to open-ended generation of ever novel goals that the agent wants to pursue. So, right, there's variability in how expressive and how powerful all of these building blocks could be, and that will then give an entire space of possible forms of consciousness. How can we investigate all this? Well, we have our idea, and that's why, in fact, we have developed this research platform, MIMO, for multimodal infant model. And it's really with a particular focus and eye on this ontogenetic transition. So we really want to simulate the development of consciousness in such a model infant. That's a choice we make, and of course this is a kind of more of a lifetime project rather than something that you do on the side. But I think this is particularly interesting. So the basic hypothesis here is that if you have an infant toddler interacting with the world, it has all these building blocks, it holds all these mechanisms, it has motivations to explore, try to understand and build better models of the world, gain control of the environment. And with time and through interacting with the environment, consciousness comes out as a sort of emergent property of these building blocks operating in the brain as the agent interacts and learns through these embodied experiences. So consciousness, that's the underlying hypothesis, emerges from brain-environment interactions. And since I told you about the multidimensional nature of consciousness, we should be a little careful and maybe say something like different facets of consciousness emerge from brain-environment interactions mediated by these cognitive building blocks, and what exactly they are, how they've been chosen and implemented, and how powerful they are. So what we should do then, or what we can do, is we can create or consider artificial simulated agents like our MIMO infant model. And if we put the right building blocks into the simulation that also make MIMO want to explore and understand and control the environment, and we let it interact with its sort of simulated world, then it might just also develop aspects of consciousness. And the reasoning is simply, well, if the building blocks are similar, the body is similar, the environment is similar, well, the outcome should be similar. Now, of course, it will be different in the details. After all, it's a simulation with lots of shortcuts, simplifications, things that are not realistic. But if you think about it, for consciousness, now, I mean, what should really matter here? Which details would be how important? The details of your body, right? If you're born blind, you'll probably still be as conscious, right? Maybe some facet of visual perception or visual consciousness is lost, or you don't have pain perception, right? There are people who have a congenital absence of pain receptors, so it's a really horrible thing, but nobody has ever doubted that they wouldn't be conscious. And if your body is a little weirdly shaped, like Nemo's body, should that really matter, right? There should still be something consciousness developing without too much of a problem, I would argue. So similar inputs, similar outcomes. And the question is, what is close enough, really? So now, there's a lot of interest these days, and we're also we're part of this game of learning from first-person data of real infants. You mount a head cam on an infant, you also register the body movements. And this is fantastic. This can tell us many things, but it's still problematic that this is passive learning because the agent has no active control over the input and there's no notion of agency. And if there's no such agency, it's much harder to infer the causal structure of the world since we don't have the potential for intervention. So let me make this very clear. If you're interested in whether phenomenon A causes phenomenon C or phenomenon B causes phenomenon C or observation C, but you can think of this as a little trivial Bayes net here, then you can just passively observe A, B, and C a lot and still be unsure of what's really going on. What you really want to do is you want to wiggle A while holding B fixed and see whether C wiggles. And then you want to wiggle B while holding A fixed and see what that does to C. And this is how you can efficiently infer the causal structure of the world. And every scientist knows that, right? That's how we design experiments, right? We control certain variables, we deliberately manipulate others. So if we don't give the learning agent the ability to do this, it will have a very hard time understanding the causal structure of the world. I'm not saying that this is completely impossible, but it will require a ton more data, probably. And if you think how quickly infants learn about the world, and with how relatively little data, at least compared to some deep learning systems they get by, I think this is actually the essential difference that we need to pay attention to. And of course, we've known since the 60s that the ability to actively control your sensory inputs versus passively being taken along for a ride and seeing much the same makes a gigantic difference. So these classic experiments from Held and Hein already demonstrated that many, many years ago. So why have we not chosen physical robots for this research program? I think there are some disadvantages for such a research program with real robots. I love robots, I've worked with robots, but compared to simulations, they tend to be somewhat cumbersome and expensive. A robot could damage itself very easily, especially if it doesn't know what it's doing early on in learning, and it might damage others. Research with robots is much harder to parallelize unless you have a lot of hardware for lots of robots. And it's also restricted to real-time interaction with the world, while in simulation, depending on how fancy and sophisticated the simulation is, you might actually do things much faster than real time, which will allow you to make progress much more quickly. And robotics research, also for a combination of the reasons above, is harder to reproduce for other labs. So in contrast, the simulation approach permits this self-determined interaction to probe the causal structure of the world. It's much cheaper and less cumbersome than robotics, permits easy parallelization, potentially could be much faster than real time, excellent reproducibility, and it also permits cumulative research because the software is easily exchanged and transferred, and then somebody can quickly build on what you've been doing, and you can quickly build on what other people have been doing, and that makes the cumulative gain of knowledge much easier. So what is MIMO about? MIMO is using the Mujoko physics engine, which Google gratefully open sourced, so it doesn't cost you much money anymore. And we try to make MIMO modular in the sense that you can plug in or out different components relatively easily to suit your particular needs. So for some projects, you might not want or need complex 5-fingered hands, and then you can use a simpler version of MIMO that has simple hands, and that will be much faster to simulate. You can plug in simple torque motors or more fancy muscle models if the biomechanics of motion are a central focus of your research, then you want to use that, but you have the choice. So the idea is always try to give people the choice so they can use this in the same way that's most adapted to their problem. For the sensory modalities, we have vision, touch, proprioception, and vestibular system, and we're currently working on audition and pain. And everybody is invited to help develop and use this platform. It's all open source. You can download it, play with it, and hopefully the installation will be not too difficult. And you can always send us an email and ask for help, of course. Now, MIMO's sense of touch is maybe the thing that is most special. It's based on the 2-point discrimination ability measured in humans, still simplified in many ways. But the idea is that a force of a point contact, because Mujoko works just with rigid objects, is distributed to nearby sensors to give a very crude approximation of soft body touch sensations where multiple parts of your finger would be touching at the same time. And we haven't done that much with Mimo. We compiled a couple of illustrations here, catching a ball, reaching for an object, touching different points on your body, or learning to stand up. This is not intrinsically motivated infant learning. This is just using off-the-shelf reinforcement learning algorithms to just illustrate some of the sort of abilities of what you might want to do with this research platform. And this runs on what standard hardware already at a fairly good pace. So we did some benchmarking here. What we are plotting here is the real time that the computation took divided by the time that was actually simulated. So the horizontal line means we're simulating exactly at real time, and everything below means we can simulate faster than real time. And this is basically here just Mimo lying on the floor doing random movements where we vary the visual resolution. So how many, or here's the tactile resolution. And here we vary the visual resolution, how many sort of pixels squared we're simulating. And even with 512 by 512 images and the full tactile resolution, we can do this in real time. And here are some examples of what this might look like for these different environments for the previous task, reaching, standing up, where, yeah, here we're not making use of any vision. The most complex one is where you have the full 5-fingered hand with muscles and touch sensation, and you're looking at it while it's making random movements and things are constantly touching each other. Then it becomes costly, of course. So coming back to the question of how do we know that we're on the right track and whether there's some indication of consciousness in there? Well, this can only be answered ultimately with data. So now, to start with, we only infer consciousness in others by looking at their behavior and by looking at analogies. Maybe if we can look inside their brain and compare that to other brains, we might get additional evidence that something similar is going on in this person's brain than in our brain or that person's brain, and that will make us believe that, from my perspective, you're actually also conscious beings and not just remote-controlled zombies or so that just seem to be that way. So ultimately, right, there's no final proof, but what we can do is we can compare the behavior developing in Mimo to the development of facets of consciousness in real infants' behavior. So people do lots of experiments on, how infants, I don't know, explore their world, ask questions, like the full spectrum of cognitive abilities. And I'm looking at Mate right now, right? Mirror self-recognition is something that Mate has worked on, and that is something that is considered one test or hallmark of at least some facet of consciousness. So ultimately, yeah, we can compare at the behavioral level, we can compare representations learned inside these models to representations that we see in brain. Might think of brain imaging and representational similarity analysis also, where you probe whether how, I'd say, visual input is represented similar to how it's represented in the real brain. And ultimately, right, these models should make testable predictions that can be used to falsify them. So ultimately, we only need to do what we've been doing all along when we follow good computational modeling practices, right? Explain the data, reproduce the data, and make novel predictions, hopefully, to explain what's going on. So that already brings me to the end. I hope I convince you that it might be interesting, maybe promising and pragmatic to think of consciousness as having many facets of being this multi-dimensional phenomenon. And these facets, I believe, emerge during cognitive development as the brain interacts with the environment, mediated by certain cognitive building blocks that we should try to define and characterize. But since these building blocks, there will always be different possible implementations and different possible integrations of those. So this will necessarily give rise to a whole space of potential consciousnesses where different facets will be expressed to bigger or smaller degrees. But with the research platform we've created here, I think we have a handle that will allow us to systematically study this space. And I'm not naive, right? This is not a thing you can do in a single PhD project or so. I think this is more like a lifetime kind of task. But I think we are starting to be at a point where we have the computational resources and tools that make such a research program viable. And I would be excited if sort of more people would, in this community also, would start thinking and talking about these topics, start using the C word, and see what progress we can make on this hopefully fruitful trajectory. And with that, I'd like to thank my lab. MIMO was mostly the work of Dominique Martin, who basically set this up as his master thesis. But then lots of other people helped. Markus Ernst is in the audience, and Francisco Lopez and Arthur Aubray are also here at this conference. And Marcel Rabe and Pierre Schumacher are or have been students in the lab who Pierre helped with the muscle version of MIMO. And yeah, thanks to all of them, thanks to the funding agencies, collaborators. I'm really indebted to Lucia Meloni here, who's an expert on consciousness study and who really also helped to sharpen my thinking about these topics, although she would probably disagree with lots of the things I said today, but that's fine, that's okay. And yeah, thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Triesch. It was amazing. Thank you for a presentation of, he said it's the first time you present these kind of ideas. So I think it went very well. I don't know if you all agree, but I think it went very well. Thank you very much. So floor open to the question. Yes, wait, let me bring the magic of the microphone.
You can go back to this slide with building blocks of C. So I very much like share the same lifetime mission and program with you. I'm just not sure how specific this is about consciousness. So if I unfold this C into cognition, we're talking about cognitive building blocks, cognitive development. Which of these points, for example, would be specific about consciousness? So when you do this data and look at MIMO and infants, how do you say this is consciousness?
That's a great question. And that's exactly the kind of debate that I kept having with Lucia Meloni, who said, but this is all just cognition. And, you know, sorry, I'm not trying to make fun of her, but so the claim here is that our consciousness is, in fact, an emergent property of our cognitive abilities. So you have our cognitive abilities, you interact with the environment, you form a consciousness necessarily. That is also to say, zombies, like some philosophers discuss them, are a contradictio in ipso. They are an impossibility. They cannot really exist. So I mean, we could go more into those of the philosophical stance here, but I was also trying to avoid any jargon from this consciousness folks. But yes, I essentially do think that consciousness and cognition have a lot to do with one another. But, well, ultimately, it's a matter of definition, right? I can leave out a couple of things from this list and build with them very fancy AI systems that do highly intelligent things. And so you might want to argue that they do cognition, but you might want to argue that they're not conscious. Right? For example, this ability to self-define goals for yourself, I think that might be something that is necessary for consciousness, but you could build lots of cognitive systems that are very intelligent and don't have any of that. Ultimately, of course, it's all a matter of definition of what we want, we as a community want to agree to call conscious versus not conscious. And right now, we're struggling, right? We don't have an agreed upon definition. And a large part of that is that we haven't seen the space. We see conscious people giving talks and listening to talks and debating about talks. We see somebody who drank too much and passed out. But of this hypothesized space, we have very few sample points. And what are we going to do with that, right? That makes it very difficult to clearly define anything. But once we start building and putting together these systems that have different versions of these building blocks or not, and see what they do and understand why they do what, why certain phenomena, certain behaviors emerge or do not emerge, like recognizing yourself in a mirror under this or that condition. Actually, there's a lot of interesting work also with this in animals, where we then start doing the neuroscience and see what neural structures are involved in that, and all that is very interesting. And yeah, I think, but it's a research program, it's not a final answer. And I think doing this research program actually will help us refine the characterization and where we want to draw the boundaries. And at this point, it's very difficult indeed. And we can argue about any of these points here.
Questions?
Thank you for the talk. I actually thought about consciousness at some point during my PhD, right? And I don't know if this is and I did not actually choose that team, but it was really interesting because it was some of the parts was like what I thought at that time as well. And one question that I had was like for number 6 of this building blocks. So do you exclude like small babies that can still laugh with peekaboo, for instance, like 1 year old or something, because they cannot really understand the logical thinking that, for instance, even if you hide your face or your hand, like, they're still there. But like the baby cannot actually understand that yet, so they can't really understand the logical order and study those. And I feel like it's lacking number 6. So do you think that babies at that point they're not conscious yet, or how would you?
Well, as I tried to say, this binary conscious non-conscious distinction that makes sense in certain situations, right? When somebody gets anesthesia or so, But in many other situations, we should think of this as something multidimensional and more graded. And I would say that in this 1-year-old, certain of these building blocks have not reached a certain level of competence, performance, power, ability, and that limits to what extent this infant expresses these different facets of consciousness, right? Generates behaviors indicative of an underlying consciousness. So if we think of this as something that is graded, then yeah, I mean, who forces us to draw a sharp boundary? I don't see much of a benefit in that. Having said that, though, if we think about now animal consciousness and how we want to treat animals that we use in food production for medical experiment and all this, we have to draw boundaries, right? And we do this in our societies right now, right? The great apes, and we treat them differently from other primates, and we treat mammals differently from invertebrates, and right, we do make all these hard boundaries because otherwise the complexity wouldn't be manageable, and we will be forced to make these calls in these kinds of contexts always. But hopefully such a research program will ultimately also inform where we want to draw these boundaries that are sometimes just necessary to draw.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm quickly following along with Nemo, so I really appreciate this. Yeah, it's another question about physics, I guess, so I'm lucky to be on this page and just spend some time talking about it. I'm actually really interested in your very careful wording about embodied interactions here, because Nemo seems to be really encapsulating this idea of the importance of embodiment, the importance of sensory modality. But here you've chosen kind of to hedge that as there's a potential that the learning rate benefits from the ability for embodied interactions, but it's not necessary, is kind of what I got from this wording. So there can be consciousness despite embodied interactions.
Yeah.
And from the wording of all these other things, it does seem like you want to leave open the space for AI, or excuse me, consciousness that is not necessarily embodied. But just to kind of play with that idea, what does that look like to you, especially if these models of the external world, body and sensory motor contingencies are so critical in your view of consciousness?
First of all, well spotted. Congratulations. It's something I have actually been thinking about for quite a while. And what my answer is, I think that interaction is important to probe the causal structure of the world. But now we can imagine such an interaction being of an agent that has a humanoid body interacting with a physical world that is similar to our physical world. But it could be an agent with not much of a body that can still act, and where the world still responds to the actions. And that might also allow this agent to probe the causal structure of that world. And to give you a concrete example, if we think chatbots, well, I mean, they can generate output that is perceived by some environment, which might be somebody talking to this, and that produces a response. So the chatbot could, try to, what happens if I insult that person or make, right? I don't know. So I think the essence is the ability to interact, to probe the causal structure. And it's very natural for us to think of, this happening in a humanoid, in a physical environment that is much like our world. But I did want to leave open the possibility that it could be some other form of interaction with some other kind of world. Now, of course, we wouldn't expect a consciousness to arise that is very similar to ours necessarily, right? I mean, think of Thomas Nagel, like what is it like to be a bat, this famous essay where he makes this point that, yeah, the bat just lives in a very different world, very different sensory perceptions. For the bat, it is a very different kind of world, but there might still be something what it's like to be a bat. So there might just be some alternative form of consciousness there. So yeah, so if this can happen in our physical world with humanoids and bats, we can imagine other kinds of worlds with other rules and other physics, and something analogous will probably happen there.
Okay. Just to kind of keep playing with that idea a little bit, would you think that's something, I was thinking of ChatGPT, something like that in more advanced form essentially also, when I was thinking about an disembodied interaction. But would you say that informational mediums as being translated, at least the way we think about it, is it a kind of embodiment as important? Like if we're seeing right here, you're solely focusing on interactions, not necessarily embodiment. Because maybe there are other kinds of embodiments that aren't things that humans care about, but other technological mediums, information mediums might. Sorry, that's a big question.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what to answer other than I think it would be repetitive to what I said a little bit. I haven't given this much thought about what sort of alternative worlds or this could be, but so if it's a pure chatbot, right, interacting with text, it will have a hard time learning about the real physics of our world, I would say, because like the embodiment that would allow you to learn that will be missing. I mean, I think you can learn a lot about the physics of the world just from reading lots and lots and lots of text, but it will not be a very efficient way of doing that, and it might just require a lot more data than what would be necessary for an infant. I'm sure that answers your question.
Not quite, but I can love you those.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a really talk. So my question is, when you first proposed this idea, what is consciousness for, and you kind of took that evolutionary perspective, one thing that occurred to me, which was could be complementary to the emergent part aspect, is the nature of social interactions. You look at higher animals, we see much more cooperation among them. And in order for me to convey my internal states to you, so you can see what's going on in my head, I have to express that to you. So there's some level of consciousness that I think that could be a driving force to have more cooperation. So my question is regarding maybe your thoughts around that, but also if there are plans to include that in how you might imagine that would look in a simulated environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. Social interaction is clearly very important for our cognitive development and also for the formation of our particular consciousness, I would say. With Gideon Deak, who's also here, I've worked actually a lot on gaze following, shared attention kinds of problems similar to Yukie, making models of how these things develop. So I do think it's important, and an agent that misses out on social interaction will have probably some aspects of its consciousness will be limited, let's say. But I also find it difficult to argue that social interaction might be strictly necessary for something consciousness-like to emerge. Think of a Kaspar Hauser, right, who grows up in the forest without any social interaction, can't speak, behaves probably very weirdly, but might still have lots of facets of consciousness, being able to distinguish himself from other agents and the rest of the world, and maybe reasoning about how to achieve certain goals and lots of things. So concretely, we don't have any immediate plans, but we could have, you know, Mimo interact with a simulated caregiver or with a real person with some VR setup, or put a little sibling there with Mimo. And I can imagine lots of interesting things that could be done there, but we don't have any immediate plans to address this in the next half year or so.
You know, talks, we can be seen as inner talking to ourselves. That relates to this question. Because there's an hypothesis that we talk to other people to express things that are thoughts, and often, and then we created, an inner loop was created to evaluate the communication of others to ourselves. So, what I also was wondering how you put awareness in this. So, one facet of consciousness is awareness. We are aware of what we feel, we are aware of what we see, what we sense, but we are also aware of inner decision making. We talk about decision making, and we are aware of things. I think that is our brain to be aware of some things. And this we can communicate to others. And then it could be that we start first communicating with others, and then we create the feedback loop in our mind to have this thoughts, and then this talking to ourselves and reflecting on decision, making a decision. So how do you put awareness in general? How do you put awareness in your
I think I've identified multiple questions there in what you said. So let me try to address them one by one. Now, languages for communication, and I already sort of tried to allude to this debate, or some people find it problematic to say that language is required for consciousness, and this sort of inner loop, inner speech. I mean, we shouldn't give much about introspection, but I feel I'm not really talking that much to myself, unless I, think in my mind ahead of what I want to tell to others. So I don't think that language is likely in the end make the cut for being some necessary ingredient, component or so of our consciousness. As for awareness, now that is sort of hidden here in a combination of 2 and 6, I would say. So attention and awareness, together with the ability to select goals, are all just different ways of ensuring coordination in a distributed system. So we actually heard one talk earlier today, and I mean, these ideas really go back all the way to the Society of Mind of Marvin Minsky, that right, our brain might actually be composed of lots of different agents, and every brain area, or maybe part of a brain area, might be an agent that does sensory processing, does a little bit of modeling, but also generates output that might be motor output, motor commands, but might also be cognitive commands, like controlling the flow of information in the brain and what is sort of passed on to what other places, and what will become widely available to large parts of the brain or not. So all these are just different reflections of a common computational problem, which is coordination. What information should go where at what time? And this needs to be controlled. And there's a range of mechanisms that help us do this. And sometimes we might refer to this somewhat fuzzily as attention or as having goals. But for me, I always try to step back a little bit and try to see what is sort of the commonality here and the sort of the most abstract and unified way of conceptualizing that. And that for me is, yeah, it's a distributed system and it needs to ensure that things are coordinated, right? It's not helpful if you're looking there when you're trying to grasp the object over there, right? So, and yeah, this is for me where attention and awareness come in. But then you also touched on this self-reflexive property that for me is sort of more in this yeah, hierarchical or hierarchy of causal models that I have in point 6 here, where yeah, you basically make models at higher sort of in this society at higher levels. You make models of what's going on in these lower levels, and you actually actively try to control those lower levels. No, but because this hierarchy has to end somewhere, probably in some prefrontal areas or so.
So thank you once again, Mr. Triesch, to say.
Thank you. It's all for that.
If you have any more questions, keep them there, because now we'll have, I'd say, a 5 minutes break, just to set up things, and then relatively short, we'll see how fun it goes. Final discussion, as in you can turn off your camera if you want to. Final discussion, as in we'll have both Professor Triesch and Professor Nagai, probably around here on chairs, because we don't have like true raised platform to make it formal, so it will be quite informal, if you're fine with that. And I would like to discuss, I mean, for you to pose more questions to both of them, and for them to pose questions to each other, perhaps. But let's do it. I'm sure I will have questions for all of them. So in the meantime, as we set up chairs, laptops, cameras, and everything, feel free to take the somewhat coffee-like substance over there, and no water, and refresh yourself, because you just did a long speech. Thank you. See you in 5 minutes, roughly. Aspect things, more on how the internal signals perhaps give rise to this and that, more the behavioral aspect. And so, but different labs do tend to work quite in isolation, despite open research and all that. So do you, first of all, is your perspective, both of you probably being inside the lab, probably more than many of us did, do you think it's possible to arrive at one point in which it will be some sort of consensus on, okay, let's not all, but let's, a couple of labs start working on this project, maybe from different angles, but working towards that. Do you see a future in which that will be inevitable or at least favorable? Yeah. I think we can hear even without, but feel free to use the mic. It shouldn't be already on.
Yeah, I think that there are, of course, it's possible that there are, we not only get just one lab, they're working on the specific topic, but then we can all together work on the address the same questions. And actually there, I have been attending this ICDL conference almost all the histories of the conferences. My very first international conference was the second ICDL conference, and then I know that there are many different aspects have been addressed in these ICDL communities, and then again after 10 years, I realized that we have been just developing their multiple functions separately. It's not as cognitive functions or consciousness or whole intelligence as a whole, but then we are just working on, for example, the joint attention mechanism, or imitation mechanism, or object manipulation mechanism. And then everyone says that, oh, our model explains the infant development of joint attention. Our model, the reinforcement learning, explain the imitation mechanism. And then we did not have like a consensus among the different research achievements. That's why I started looking at the predictive coding hypothesis that might be explaining their something as a unified principle for development. Also, I have to admit that our modeling studies are still not really continual development yet. In order to publish the papers, we have to get the result, and so we have to focus on one specific task. But then they try to connect, or try to have their more unified the underlying mechanism, which can connect all the different experiments or different tasks of learning. So, and then I think that many of their people who are sitting here also realize that we should look at the more continual and also the intelligence as a whole, or also including the consciousness or any different types of the development aspects. And then I think that Jochen's talk was very nice to that can give one ideas how we can really try to cover the different aspects of the intelligence and then cognitive functions. So I think that there are many ways. Of course, there's someone can focus on the very specific task, but also they're looking at the more unified or the system as a whole is also very important business direction.
Professor Triesch, what's your?
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Yukie. First of all, I thank you again for organizing all this.
Thank you for coming by. Thank you all.
What I want to add is, or emphasize already in my talk, that I do think reproducibility and cumulative research are very important. As we try to approach harder problems in development, it's very important that we make it as easy and as efficient to build on others' works. And there are certain challenges there and certain ideas of how we can make this easier. And this can come in different forms. For example, subscribing to a particular conceptual framework like free energy or predictive coding that can be greatly facilitating doing cumulative research, because you're recycling and reusing the same conceptual ideas, applying them to a new problem, and that makes it much easier, of course, to scale and build bigger systems, because you're just reusing components in maybe somewhat different guise. But also use of shared resources like a research platform like Vimo are another way of making it easier to approach our research cumulatively. So there are different ways, and I think we should embrace all of them. And it's really the only way forward in trying to tackle harder problems and later the complexities of development, right? I mean, let's face it, right? It's an extremely challenging problem. So if we don't find good ways of working together cumulatively as a community, we're kind of bad, I would say. We can't continue like working on all these little isolated models. In the end, this is not going to be enough.
Sure.
You mentioned Mimo. I have a question because I usually use a simulator to do all the research. I now we don't have real physical robots and stuff. And one of the things that we are having problems is that people really make hard critics say that, okay, that's still in simulation. Simulation is different from the real world. I know, but yes, but we need to do this first there. And we are trying to solve hard problems, maybe focus on cognitive side, not exactly emotional or these things. And so this is one thing that we are using simulation. How do you see these kind of comments when people say that, okay, that's simulation, the real world is different? How do you deal with that?
Well, the question is who is saying that and for what reasons? Of course, a simulation will always be a simplification and abstraction, and whether that is legitimate or not depends on what you're trying to do. If the goal is that ultimately you want a real robot to show a certain behavior, then yeah, there might be lots of problems that if your simulation is too simplified, there's a sim to real gap, it simply won't work on the real robot. Now, people take this problem very seriously and have made a lot of progress. But it's really much of an issue if that's the goal, to ultimately port this onto a robot. For Mimo and studying the emergence of aspects of consciousness, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Of course, right? I mean, the essence of any theoretical endeavor in science is abstraction and simplification. So there's a lot of benefit of doing that, of describing the solar system as interacting point masses and things like that. It's so there are situations where that can cause a problem, but there are situations where it's actually exactly the right thing to do. It always depends on the context.
Well, thank you. I agree with your point that the simulation has some advantages compared to the real world. The reason why I use world is that I'm interested not only in the learner side, but also the teachers, especially how humans would like to interact with world and how the human would teach something to the worlds. And then still we cannot really simulate the diverse human behaviors. Currently, of course, there are many nice sophisticated robot simulators. So in that case, it's better to utilize the robot simulators, which is much easier to use. But then in order to investigate how humans would react to the certain artificial agent, then I think the real world is much easier to implement the real context.
Any questions, comments from the audience? I mean, this is the time to put your, I guess, more philosophical and weird questions, because they are trapped here with us. So if you want to go deeply into the detail of any of stuff, I won't block you, or I will. So feel free to think about that. In the meantime, okay, another weird and ethical side question, I think. Thinking about consciousness and the role that robots are having in societies. They're not prevalent already, but we're starting to see a trend in which companies are presenting the humanoid robot, they're presenting them working closely with people in Amazon warehouse. So how much do you feel the outside world, the outside of research is ready to tackle with the ideas of robots working in similar ways as humans, predictive coding? Do you think it's necessary to present to people how the robot is operating and why it's doing that? At the same time, do you think that telling people how we define consciousness and therefore that robot is not conscious will have an effect? So my question is, how do you think that people outside of research will react to what we are developing, and do you feel the need to communicate that in a certain way or don't?
My take on this is that I feel very privileged to be allowed to work on this with, well, I was going to say taxpayers' money. In my case, it's actually the Quant family that gives the money for the professorship. Anyway, those are details, but right, most of us are publicly funded. We do this with taxpayers' money. So there should be some accountability. We should tell the public what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we should be really aware of concerns that the public might have about what we're doing, and we should be able to justify what we're doing. And the best, but the only way is really to enter into a dialogue with society. So I'm super active there, but I try to seize here and there opportunities to speak to the general public and explain what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then often people ask questions and share their concerns, and I think it's very important and good that they get answers firsthand from the scientists. I mean, there are lots of journalists who do amazing jobs, but often it's different. And the reporting of journalists is often these days a bit sensationalist, because they have their own objective function where they're trying to maximize clicks on their articles. And that makes it even more important that, right, we can directly interface with the public, and I think we should all do so.
Yeah, I think there are this community, the developmental robotics community, does not have yet closely with the society. For example, compared to the human robot interaction communities, and also I'm working on the autism spectrum disorders, and then this research topic is much more attractive for the older people.
It's closer to what they can experience. Yeah.
I think the developmental robotics is not really necessary in their life yet, but they want to know more about why the autism occurs and what can be the potential assistive technologies or something like that. So, but then still they are very much interested in what happens in their science and also the technology development, and they want to really learn from our experiences, especially that I often give organize a workshop with on their simulators of autism perception, and then we invite their parents who have the autistic child, and also the school teachers taking care of autistic children, and they are very, very keen about their new findings in the communities. And then I also sometimes talk about our robotics study, and then they are very much interested in how they have no idea how robot can be utilized for autism study, for assisting or understanding the autism. But then I think there is we can really contribute to the better understanding of the human society. It's not only just developing the nice, cute childlike robots, but also developing the robots, but then our findings can be really utilized for improving or changing their understanding of ourselves, the human ourselves. So I think that we should create more opportunities to connect our sciences in society.
You said one thing that I think is very interesting, and I will pinpoint this question to be honest. Who here thinks that developing robotics is necessary to society? Raise your hands. Be shy. Can we belong together? Belong together. Okay. So, do you think both of you that developing robotics is necessary to society?
Don't talk future. In the long-term future, of course, we need engineer. My interest is more on the understanding part, not just developing, designing them. Then by designing their developmental systems, we can understand better their developmental mechanism in the humans. That's why I think that the development robotics is important.
It's what also Professor Triesch mentioned before. It's the synthetic approach to studying.
Yeah, I think we can learn a lot from building robots. We can learn a lot about cognition. We should, I mean, what we need to be somewhat careful, right? I mean, of course, robots can benefit us in many different ways. Right, whether they mow our lawn or help with complicated surgeries or so. But at the same time, we have autonomous systems on battlefields that kill other people. And there are certain political and economic pressures in our current societies that drive much of these developments. And I think it's also very healthy to question some of these pressures and some of these developments and ask ourselves, what do we really want to do in the long term so that we can all live happy and fulfilled lives where we feel we contribute something to our society. And if we reach a point where robots can just do everything so much better than we can, it's not that obvious that this is a much better world to live in, I would say. So I think it requires a societal debate, what sort of developments really serve humanity and what are potentially dangerous and don't contribute to the well-being of us. And I don't think this is an easy debate. I don't think this is obvious, and not every new technological development necessarily makes things better. So, I mean, of course, I'm trying to contribute to this, but I think, yeah, it requires debate, and we should discuss this very carefully.
Oh yeah. That connects, I think, very well with how do we, as a researcher, because I mean, I don't know about you, but the drive for knowledge is intrinsically human, and that's hard at some point to say we have to stop and think very carefully where this knowledge is bringing us. I think that's a discussion we need to have as a society and also within the research community. But it's not you can make claim for both ends, going on stopping. Yeah, please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for your talks today. It was a pleasure listening to you. I kind of apologized before and going on even further tangent. You said that this consciousness research is sort of a lifetime project. And I was wondering, have you ever thought about the point where you say yourself, okay, now it's better to to talk to the ethics department. When is the point for you where you would think about the ethical implications and empathy for the machine? Like, because at some point it all reads a little bit like a Star Trek episode, right?
So I have a colleague in Mainz, Thomas Metzinger, is a very famous philosopher of consciousness. And a few years ago, we signed a moratorium to say we should stop all research on artificial consciousness, synthetic consciousness, because the risk is simply too high that we will bring in unnecessary suffering into this world. And I recently wrote a grant proposal on studying both the development of consciousness in infants and in machines, and I wanted him as an advisor for the ethics part. And in the end, he refused to join because he said, no, right? I mean, this is not going to serve you well. I very publicly said that we should stop research on this because I think it's sort of already too dangerous. And yeah, so his name ended up not being on the proposal. So that maybe just as a little anecdote. Personally, I think there's not much of a risk at this point. And here's the reason why. If we want to build machines that have consciousness, we can do that without those machines feeling pain, I believe, and suffering. Why? The systems that are our personal pain system, that's a weird term, I don't know. But
yeah,
this is something that evolution put in us to basically keep us out of trouble, to avoid that we engage in behaviors that ultimately harm our reproductive success. And that's why we all have pain systems. And they're so powerful that they can pretty much overrule anything else. Evolution kind of found it necessary to put those in just to keep us out of trouble and maximize our chances of reproductive success. I mentioned in my presentation these patients with congenital analgesia, I think it's called, who don't feel pain, and many of them die as children because some serious problem is just simply never discovered. They don't get any treatment. Now, coming to machines, if we build artificial intelligences, or let's say robots with consciousness, with the technology we have, it's actually pretty easy. We will ultimately build them from mass-produced components, and we will be able to fairly easily back up their brains such that when they get into trouble, well, we're just going to replace them, right? So there's actually not much of a need for them to have such sort of pain systems that will stop them doing anything because they're suffering so much. So I don't see much of a reason why we shouldn't be able to build them without such systems, so that also there won't be sort of the equivalent of our suffering in there. It's a hypothesis. I'm very well aware of that, but that makes me sleep pretty well at night. So I don't fear too much for Nemo. I mean, having said that, we are in the process of implementing pain perception there because I guess I'm a little bit curious what will happen.
I mean, you can test if it's really makes a difference or not until you implement it, I suppose. The receptor and the ability to survive. Not necessarily to reproduce, or maybe yes, to survive at least, like how much of a difference does that make? As I said, the good thing about the synthetic approach to cognition studies, in general, intelligence, is that you can try stuff out with less probably concern on your side, maybe. Yeah, I think the topic has been.
Yeah, actually, the reason why we are interested in that automating our system and considering system is also to address the consciousness or pain issues. And then we just started with the sensory signal, which we can really obtain and measure in the human size. But I think the directions we are targeting is very similar.
Yeah, I like that you both are huge papers. I see very different ways to approach the same interest at the end of the day, which is one more from the ground up, parts like modulation, modeling the system, and one is that it goes and studies like the behavior of can be infants and caregivers, can be even just again signal see how to our body and signal that. So that's again one of the reasons why I think it's necessary. We all think it's necessary to come together as a community and see the different approaches. And so if we manage to at some point have a modular system which we can plug in different aspects, made by different research group and say, okay, this is big bottom up and that's top down. One more from data collected people and one more from theoretical modeling, like how do they interact, which different type of facets of consciousness can arise from the combination of the different models that we can have. So it's quite interesting. I think we have quite a couple of questions. Yeah. Didn't see you goes first. Say. Oh, this is not first. Sorry.
Oh.
You are awesome.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to just kind of think to this core theme of the top of the workshop, which is like architecting intelligence, and we talked a lot about embodiment, we talked a lot about different conscious ideas, but or at least I didn't think actually. But I really want to think about these kind of in light of something. Bringing it to social interactions and the importance of sociality and thinking about how sociality might be kind of critically embodied and how we think about if something like sociality is so critical for cognition is as we know it, or for consciousness or for intelligence, need these things, intelligence, consciousness, cognition, necessarily be embodied? And so the reason of that is so that there are things which can interact with one another, whether it's a parent with an infant, whether it is one AI to another AI who must like interact with text-based mediums, for example, an embodied text-based medium, whether it is from person to person, organism to organism, whatever, if it's a concept or not. So do you think sociality is critically important for the development of cognition for intelligence or consciousness as we care about it? Big long terms there. And if so, do you think that these things are necessarily embodied to get that across?
Who wants to go first?
Yes, sociality is really important. I'm not sure whether I should say critically important, but I think it's very important, especially their field their embodiment. These things create their constraint in our experiences and also the information transfer. If we are not supposed to share our experiences with others, maybe there is no, force us to create a language, for example.
So I think that sociality or social interactions and the embodiment, also the blame, create their boundaries or constraint, which encourage our information processing to make more abstract representations or hierarchical representations. So that's why there are humans' experiences still quite different from the machine learning or computational technologies, which do not try to limit certain computational resources or embodiment resources.
I don't really have much to add. Maybe the detail. Scaffolding by the social environment, of course, greatly facilitates learning. We all know that. And learning about the social environment can, of course, only happen with the social environment. So it also depends on, what aspects of cognition you're talking about, right? You want to build models of how humans behave. Well, there's no way of doing that without the social environment. So there it's critical. But for learning how to grasp an object, maybe it just helps and makes it faster. For learning how to walk, probably makes it faster, but is it really critical? I don't know. So it depends on really what aspect of cognition you have in mind, I would say.
I'm a little embarrassed to ask this question after a serious question, because it was in the line with the previous discussion, but since it became back to like a serious one, coming back to the previous one. So I think you mentioned about talking to the public and also about how the AI is going to develop in the future. And actually, when I talk to my friends who's not in the STEM field about my research, like 100%, like literally everyone asks me, is this like sci-fi thing where AI is going to take over human or invading human? Is going to happen in the near future? And I'm answering like every time, not really. It's not going to happen soon, or like in a different ways. But like, how would you answer if you were asked like that?
I would probably say that I would probably begin talking about my own research and what the goals and motivations are, and I don't think nobody needs to be too afraid, other than maybe Nemo himself, if he has this pain research. But then I would probably point out that, I mean, there are many actors in this, in many different countries and many different political systems. And we simply don't know what they're up to. So it's probably good to be somewhat cautious. And personally, many years ago, I already signed petitions for worldwide bans on robotic weapons that can kill autonomously. I think it's good if we think about what kind of things we want. Like we have treaties about chemical weapons and biological weapons and nuclear weapons, and maybe we should be thinking about similar kinds of treaties for AIs and robotics. There doesn't seem too much of a political interest in the relevant countries right now. But if this pressure doesn't come from the people living in these countries who sometimes elect governments, then who knows what we're getting ourselves into. So, yeah, I don't think there's an imminent risk that robots will take over and kill humanity in the next couple of years. But I think it's time already now for certain kinds of actions, for starting certain kinds of debates, and for trying to influence political decision makers that things are not moving in bad directions.
I think there are some of their human functions have been already replaced by their machine functions or AI technologies. The reason why we are still utilizing or developing the human-like robot is that I think that it is more challenging for us to just develop in their, I don't know, lighting functions or reading functions or communicating functions, because the humans can do everything as a whole. Then maybe I'm not sure whether the robotics researcher really want to replace the humans with our human robot, but rather by investigating or developing a human-like robot, we can learn how each function can be developed artificially, and then how we can replace the such functions independently, not the human as a whole. So then I think by explaining these ideas, maybe the people will not need to worry about this, why we are developing human.
Yes to all of that. But also it makes me wonder, on the flip side, like, this is probably a question more related to cognition and cognitive science, neuroscience, than it is robotics. Or since we're going towards the direction of developmental consciousness, robotics, it might also arrive a time in which we need to, start thinking about, if we know which are the blocks of consciousness, supposedly we're at one point, and also managed to bridge the gap and see, find equivalencies in humans. Okay, this part of the human complex does this function of the our 7, 20, 50 blocks, whatever we call that. At some point, is it that unbelievable to think about some research, some question research that starts digging into how can we not have that in humans or other non-synthetic agents? Like, this is a question of the power of knowledge in general beyond robotics. Like, even just knowing about the human brain functions can be somewhat relevant. We have experiences in the past in which experiments on people were quite terrible, and I think it's not beyond the future to fall into that some point, hopefully not soon, maybe never. But do you think that is a concrete possibility, that just the knowledge about the human function could be used in such a way of, if we can remove pain receptors and the drive to survive from people, why shouldn't we do that if we want to mass produce stuff and just put them in factories to work? Even if they only reward what we give them. It was a far-fetched question, far-fetched,
I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but of course we do, and we will continue to take inspiration from the brain. And as we, let's say you want to build a conscious robot, and you understand well enough what you're talking about. I don't yet, so that you manage.
Yeah.
Then the question will arise, would a robot with an altered consciousness maybe be more useful? Maybe you want, I don't know why I keep coming back to these examples, but maybe you want a robot soldier that does not have any fear. And I'm 100% sure that by agencies like DARPA, they will be happy to fund research to get exactly that. Maybe not 100%. No, pretty sure. Because those might just be the much better soldiers, and if you lose some of those, the public doesn't care much, right? So here we go. Yeah, so I think this is a very real possibility. Maybe it's in fact close to inevitable.
Yeah, probably time's over. So, okay, so there are no more questions. If not, okay. So thank you once again for our speakers today. So thank you for joining us. Yeah, and thank you, Magdalena, which is stick to us up until now, which is late and 20 over there in Germany. So thank you everybody for coming by, and I hope to see you in the next few days.
And thank you again for organizing.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, which couldn't be with us due to parenting.
Yeah.
And time zones. Yeah. Thank you again. And thank you to ICDL for allowing this to happen. Thank you.
What do we propose? What do we do?
I did the very late registration and started going to the paper tomorrow. I got no information about the session. So yeah, if I understand it, I just
Não é tão pesada, mas meu Deus do céu. Obrigada. Eu estou em encontrar a minha outra amiga brasileira aí do pessoal. Se fizer uma mensagem,
Perfeito.
eu vou 561-870-3264 no WhatsApp.
Perfeito, eu te mando mensagem. Obrigada.
Se quiser encontrar a gente, me avisa, eu te falo no final. A gente não está falando sobre o certo.
Okay,
Tem um mouse aqui, tem um mouse aqui.
Let me check.
Aqui perto. Sei lá, 5, 10 minutos.
Eu não sei sobre o poder, eu digo sobre isso, mas eu já disse.
Tchau.
Sim, obrigada. Obrigada.
Okay.
Ok.